Lost is over, but we have to go back down the hatch here on RHAP. We know scripted TV. Hello, everybody. I am Josh Wigler. I am joined here, as always, by my co host, Mike Bloom, who normally I might ask, Mike, where are we? Except I know the answer to that question. We are on the RHAP network. This is the Down the Hatch podcast, and we are back in Lost Season 1, talking about the first season of Lost for folks who have never seen it before until now. Mike Bloom, it's the Lost Season 1 for First Timers podcast.
Josh, why don't you add one more item there to make it 4? We know now how important 4 is as a number.
Okay, so what's the fourth? Where are we? I mean, on Earth?
There we go. That's a nice shoe-in. Though,
We're
who
also-
knows? A big question on this very season is like, where the hell are we on another planet? Did the aliens pick up all these people, beam them out of flight 815? I'm so happy, Josh, not only to talk about this incredible Emmy-winning season of television, but now I imagine for all the first-time viewers of Lost, the podcast name now makes a lot more sense.
I think it makes a lot more sense for the people who have now watched Lost Season 1, which we hope includes you. If you missed the first podcast in this series, first of all, welcome. It's Down the Hatch. It's the reboot of Down the Hatch, formerly a post-show recaps podcast, now an RHAP We Know Scripted TV podcast, and to celebrate the relaunch, as well as to celebrate the 20th anniversary of Lost, Mike Bloom and I, who have previously, in a spoiler-filled capacity, recapped every single episode of Lost, we are now going season by season for people who have never seen the show before over the course of a 6-part series where we are talking about every single season of Lost as though you have watched it for the very first time. So today's conversation is about Lost Season 1. This conversation assumes you have seen every single episode from Lost Season 1, but no further. There shall be no spoilers beyond the scope of Season 1 of Lost. We are inviting you to come along this crazy journey with us. We would love to hear feedback from all of you. Down the hatch, RHAP at gmail.com. That's down the hatch, RHAP at gmail.com. Make sure you're subscribed as well so you don't miss a single episode of this podcast series. There's the Down the Hatch podcast feed. Wherever you get your podcasts, just search for Down the Hatch Lost and you shall find us there. Of course, you want to subscribe to all the incredible things we are doing here on RHAP We Know Scripted TV. Go to robhasawebsite.com/scripted for all of that information. That's robhasawebsite.com/scripted. You will also be pointed towards the RHAP We Know Scripted TV YouTube, Mike, where we are doing video podcasts here with the aid of some handy dandy visuals today as we go through each and every single episode of Lost Season 1 as though it had been experienced in one single chunk. You sat down, you pressed play on Netflix because that's where Lost is streaming as of August 2024 at the very least. You sat there, you plowed through 25?
Technically speaking, yeah. I mean, if we're counting, there were obviously a 2-part premiere and a 3-part finale, which is like 25 total hours of television, I believe is what it comes out to.
Absolute madness. People who are watching the video version, they're like, okay, show us the visual aids. Okay, we're going to bring up the visual aids already. We're just going to get right into the visual aids. Yeah,
look at this beautiful, beautiful visual aid. Because, yeah, I would imagine for those of you that blitz through, there's probably a lot that's blending together, not only from the tumultuousness of experiencing something like Lost, where so much is thrown at you, especially in the first season, but also, and this is commonly what I experience, Josh, when I binge, which is like, it's tough for me to make heads or tails of, okay, what was episode 3 versus episode 4, and what was in episode 13 versus episode 15? What helps with Lost is that in the first season, we are going to guide each episode through the narrative of a singular character through flashbacks and present on island activities. So it's a little bit more of a demarcator, but I'm sure confusion is abound, and consider us your guides to the other side.
Okay, so one last reminder here. We are doing this podcast as though you have finished watching Lost Season 1. The assumption is that you have only seen the first season of Lost, and now you want to hear people tell you what the frack you just watched. Frack will make more sense.
Wrong show.
Frack will make more sense when you return on the other side of our Lost miniseries. Mike Bloom and I are talking about Battlestar Galactica. We're going to be resuming with Season 3, so your bonus homework is to watch the miniseries and the first 2 seasons of Battlestar Galactica. Battlestar Galactica over the course of the next like month and a half. You've got like 6-7 weeks.
Let's truly prove the nerds that exist within the hatchlings to give them bonus homework.
Homework.
I feel like only a specific populace in the school-going population would respond to like, ooh, bonus homework. Tell me more.
Let's hope that it doesn't feel like homework and instead feels like you are going down the hatch of a buried treasure, Mike. As we're going to talk about Lost Season 1, let's just hop right into it here as we're going to use the episodes as a guide to talk about what happens in Season 1, theories that were developed along the way, what folks should be paying attention to, and just got to begin with the pilot, in which we open on an eye because, of course, we open on an eye, Mike Bloom, as Lost begins with this incendiary opening set piece where Matthew Fox, late of Party of 5 at this point.
He is late to the party.
He is late to the party. And this is one party that maybe you want to be like super late to, as in like never show up for.
Hurley almost was late to the party when it came to Oceana Gate 1-5 in the finale.
He has been part of a plane that has crashed on a mysterious island, and mysteriously, for whatever reason, Mike, Jack is waking up. This man is named Jack, and he's waking up in a bamboo forest. Like, how did his body get jettisoned over here when there's so much wreckage on the beach? Is an opening question. And also, why is there such a good boy Labrador? Just like, is it a Labrador? Is it a golden retriever?
I believe it's a Labrador. It's a Labrador. And also should mention, how did Jack keep his shoes on, considering that there are a couple hanging from the jungle as well. But all that piece is very quickly disrupted as Jack makes his way out of the jungle silently, and the camera pans around to show absolute mayhem. And then we just jump right into, for lack of a better term, triage, where we follow Jack basically jumping from crisis point to crisis point. He's able to save some people. He's not able to save others. RIP to the poor guy that ends up getting sucked into the freaking jet engine before it explodes.
For the people who've never seen this before, this is not a huge spoiler at all to say that that man's name is Gary Troop, and he is explored in like Lost got really big, was a pioneer really in like alternate reality games that were associated with the show. Once the season, premiered, once the show premiered with such success, for season 2, there was like a big ramp up. And for season 3, there was a big thing going on of all these behind the scenes stuff. And one of them was about a book author of a salacious book called Bad Twin, written by Gary Troop, who's the dude who gets sucked into the engine. So that's like the level of detail that surrounds the world of Lost.
Yeah, Lost really was, I think, pioneering what we kind of refer to now as a second screen experience, where it was, okay, there's so many things that are introduced within the mythology of Lost, and sometimes there are subsequent websites set up officially by production to refer back to as to, okay, I did some research on this. How does that inform what might happen on the show? And Bad Twin is a part of that. I do believe at one point, like, was there a partial part of a manuscript of Bad Twin that was also released by the show?
Bad Twin is tragically available. You can read it.
That sounds like my relationship status in college.
Tragically available was what I was when Lost premiered, for sure. So yeah, I mean, the show begins with this explosive set piece. It's a hugely expensive pilot. It's directed by J.J. Abrams. J.J. Abrams, as Mike and I mentioned in our inaugural podcast of this Lost for First Timers series, his name is really associated with Lost. His direct involvement, it's fairly minimal beyond the pilot, but he is all over the pilot. He directs this thing. He really sets the tone visually for the show. And like, this is 2004, 20 years ago when this show premieres. And part of this is that you and I are older than the average bear, the average person who's
I don't know how old bears live to, but I would imagine that's the case.
Discovering Lost for the very first time. Maybe, polar bears don't live that long on the island, apparently.
Yeah, not when Sawyer gets involved.
Not when Sawyer gets involved. Like, in my mind, and we've talked about this on Down the Hatch previously, like, if there's something about Lost probably because technology isn't an enormous piece of what's going on the island because they
Right.
are crashed on an island that
The closest thing we get is Saeed harvesting all the laptop batteries to start a signal fire.
so it feels kind of timeless. But for 2004, a big opening action-packed set piece like this on ABC was an enormous deal, and I think really sucks you in, much like Gary Troop into the engine, Mike. That you get sucked into Lost very quickly with this opening sequence that really only just further unravels over the course of this two-part pilot with tons of different questions that are put on the board. The very famous guys, where are we at the end of the pilot
Mhm.
when a group of these survivors goes to search for a radio signal and they find out that a distress call has been playing for 15 years. The fact that there's a freaking polar bear on the island, though that's a teeny tiny little thing compared to whatever this monster is that we'll
Yep.
catch a glimpse of by the end of this season. This first hour, these first 2 hours of Lost, Mike, really kind of set the tone for everything that's going to come next.
Well, not only that, you talk about propulsive. If I remember correctly, the first act of Lost, from Jack waking up in the jungle to all of our main characters standing out on the beach, just watching these trees kind of get upended in the background, trying to wonder what else is on this island besides them. I'm pretty sure that is all uncut and takes up a significant portion of time, which, especially for 2004, where like ad revenue was king, felt like such a big risk on top of the big risk that was the pilot in general. I talked about this during our inaugural podcast, but I really encourage people now, especially, to go check out the featurette about the making of the pilot, because now that you see how audacious it was to the point that they crashed a freaking plane
Yeah.
on the beach, you gain so much more appreciation for all the work that went into it. And yeah, this is honestly, in my opinion, a perfect pilot, a perfect start. Unlike poor Seth Norris, Greg Grumberg, who ends up getting pulled out by the monster, a perfect pilot in that it sets up, it introduces at least all of our main cast, even if it is only really from a flashback perspective, focusing on a select few. Within those select few, there are also some fun Lost trademark twists as to, oh, I didn't realize this character was that thing before crashing on the island. But it also, by and large, does a great job of, much like the passengers of Oceanic 815 themselves, throwing us into what one character will call later the jungle of mystery,
Yeah.
and trying to truly experience just the realms of reality that can be pushed in this space.
Do you have a favorite moment from the pilot? Like when you think about the Lost pilot, is there an image, a line of dialogue, a sequence that comes to mind for you first?
It's two scenes, both of them involving Jack, and one loud and one quiet. The first is because, suffice it to say, as you've experienced over the course of season one, Jack is a little bit of our main character here. You know,
If
Lost
there is one, yeah.
Lost sports an incredible ensemble cast, but Jack is someone that, as we'll talk about in a few episodes from now, is really thrust into this leadership position, almost the sole decision maker on behalf of the group. And so, in the first part, we sort of see what he's able to do in action, which is him saving the life of Rose, which was his seatmate back on Oceanic 815, that he is able to, he doesn't need the pen. He's able to give her life regardless of that. But then countered that moment of strength to almost a moment of weakness when he comes face to face, or face to back, I suppose, with Kate Austin, and how he has to essentially talk her through stitching up this giant gash he had in his back that he had the entire time that he was saving people's life as he was bleeding out on the beach.
Do you think he got the gash from from saving people? Was it like a little scratch and then he just like stretched, he overstretched? It's like, oh,
I mean, I don't know if that's how skin works, but sure.
All right, let's write down to-do list, find out how skin works. Okay.
Yeah, that's not going to put us on any lists or anything.
No.
But
Oh, no.
I do think
Take it
that
back.
those two moments represent really well the character of Jack, and that this is a guy that, to your point, will stretch himself to the point of heavy bleeding to save other people around him. But I think it also
Is Jack Mr. Fantastic? Certainly a fantastic Mr. Fox.
I mean, listen, I think if casting for the Fantastic Four films back in the day would have gone a different direction, I think we could have cast, like, you have him as Mr. Fantastic, Kate would have been a good Sue Storm. I think you could have gotten either Charlie or Sawyer as a
Human Torch.
as a Human Torch, and then you have, I don't know, do you have like Locke as thing.
I think Locke is your Doctor Doom, probably.
Yeah, I would imagine that's the case.
Locke Doom.
Or well, I think there might be a character introduced in a couple seasons that probably makes an even better Doctor Doom.
Of
but
course.
I think for now, yeah.
If we're using season 1 only, Hurley is the thing.
Or is Ethan Doctor Doom?
Ethan might be Doctor Doom.
Ethan's like the mole man.
Ethan's mole man. Ethan's mole man for sure, no question. Okay, so what's your bigger moment that comes to mind?
Well, that was the first one, which was everything going on with the Jack walking around. I mean, he saves a person's life, multiple people's lives. He's the one that helps in this picture here save Claire from being crushed by a wing that's falling alongside her and Hurley. And so, in my opinion, while we find out stuff about other characters as these 2 episodes go along, this episode is really all about Jack Shephard. And we see from the beginning how this guy is incredibly capable before we find out in subsequent episodes about how maybe he's not incredibly capable of other things.
We'll put a pin in Jack, or some black thread in Jack at least. The second part of the pilot, I think, is much less about Jack as it is about the greater ensemble. And I think as far as like, if there's a big sequence beyond the opening sequence that I think about a lot, it's what's known as the Hollywood and Vines sequence, where Michael Giacchino, who is the composer of the show, and
speaking of Fantastic Four,
who is the composer of the upcoming Marvel Fantastic Four movie and is the composer of so many other big budget blockbusters, and really makes a huge name for himself here on Lost. That sequence, the bum 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 bum, you hear it in the Down the Hatch theme song. It's baked in by the great Alex G. And you see all of these characters who are summiting the hillside, which is like, when you actually like stop to think about the mechanics of it, it's like, could you not have found another way? Like,
these are degular, I wouldn't even say Americans, Josh. They're not in taking a course in orienteering.
But as we see in season 1, Kate's a tracker. Like, Kate should be able to like find a trail that's not just like the soily mountainside.
Yeah, but Josh, as we're going to talk about as soon as next episode, she has other things on her mind. In particular, another man who is bleeding out, who knows her past.
She does have other things on her mind. So that moment is just great though, for the score specifically. Really highlights the incredible sonic soundscape of Lost. The quieter moment that I have, we'll talk about shortly.
You say sonic, all I'm thinking is like Green Hill Zone as they're making their way over the mountains in Hawaii.
Yeah. Oh God, Sonic. Forget it. I don't want to talk about Sonic music because it's so good right now. We could go on a real sidebar, and we have to talk about every single episode of Lost season 1. So let's move on to an episode that broke our brains when we did the initial Down the Hatch run. Tabula Rasa. Tabula Rasa here, Mike Bloom. We used to have, we can't really talk about the why, but we had a time limit on every episode of Down the Hatch initially that we were like, we're not going to do more than X amount of minutes on the show. And then we got to this episode recap and horribly violated like our only cardinal rule at that point. And Tabula Rasa has a special place in Down the Hatch history for totally changing the format of the show. So big ups to this one. But Tabula Rasa is a great example of, so in the first episode, obviously we get like the 3-pronged perspective of the crash of Oceanic Flight 815 from the POVs of Jack, Kate, and Charlie.
Which is, again, an incredible visual feat. Like the actual image of the back half of the plane just breaking apart and people getting sucked out. Again, for 2004, it holds up incredibly well.
Huge. But it's just the beginning of what's going to be a feature of Lost. Sometimes a bug, potentially, but a feature of Lost all the same, which is we are going to use these episodes to examine the characters in richer detail. So throughout season 1, we have these different flashback sequences, and it begins with Kate Austin, Evangeline Lilly's character. And so I think, especially with the way that these episodes are structured out, it's a real gift for this conversation, Mike, that we can use these as stopping points for the main characters as we're getting to meet them in real time on the show. We can kind of talk about them for first-time viewers. So one of the big twists, one of the things that's great about Lost is, it lobs a lot of questions at you, but sometimes it answers those questions faster than you think, but those answers almost always yield more questions. So the pilot has this big question of, who's the fugitive? Who do these handcuffs belong to that Walt finds in the jungle? Within that episode, within the pilot, it's Kate. We know it's Kate, who has up to this point seemingly been like really on the level, solidly with Jack. Why is she a fugitive being transported from Sydney to Los Angeles? And of course, Tabula Rasa examines this question, Mike, but does not answer it at all. But we get a much closer look at Kate Austen in this episode all the same.
Yeah, neither does her second flashback or three flashback episodes this season. Of course, we'll get to it. The infamous, whatever the case may be, and of course, Born to Run. That you'll slowly find out that there are a lot of questions behind the lurid past of Kate Austen, and we're not necessarily going to get a huge amount of major details from this set of three in particular. Her past, even her family, to a certain extent. I mean, we find out obviously about one of her like first loves, childhood friends, as she said, the man she killed. But in this episode, it does a nice job of setting the scene as we'll get through a lot of season one, what were these people doing in Australia that led them to get onto this fateful flight? And in Kate's case, she was evading the law. She was on the run from this Marshal Edward Mars, who wound up on the plane with her and now is subsequently on his deathbed on the island. And we find out from her that, this is one of those many Kate schemes we'll get where she has taken on another identity, but she's just trying to hide out, just trying to make a living while she is being doggedly pursued by this man. But unfortunately, it will not come to pass.
It will not come to pass. Through the Kate flashback, we will come to meet the Peach Man, Ray Mullen, the one-armed man, but not a fugitive in this universe, at least. You never see the Peach Man again, but Mike Bloom and I love the Peach Man.
Yeah, we call him the Peach Man because there was one shot where Kate is in a pantry and there's like scores of jars of fruit,
like jarred things.
Yeah, and so we said, like, why does he need so many peaches? I think they're pears, but
it turns out that they were pears. We kept calling him a Peach Man, so we love Ray Mullen. But this episode is great, I think, in a lot of different ways. I think,
as the first regular episode of Lost.
I really, really like it. I think it's an underrated episode. And one of the things about this show is, and Mike and I are very biased, we love this show. Like by and large,
if this has not been made abundantly clear.
Yeah, by how many hours we've spent talking about this show. Like I feel like the worst episodes of the show are still worthwhile. And I would put this certainly. I mean, we did rankings. This is a back half episode of Lost, I believe, for us. But there's a lot, like Jack's sort of inability to let things go, which we know is a huge theme for him in season one. I am what does he say? Like, I am not a murderer. And like the judgment, his quick to judgment, side of him, which I think is a really obnoxious side of Jack for a lot of people, comes out here. Sawyer, who always loves to take a stand and take charge, but sometimes bumbles it in this massive way.
Because this is the thing we're going to get, I think, before it sort of ends up coalescing into a Jack versus Locke situation towards the end, where Jack's going to tackle him at Boone's funeral and say we're going to have a Locke problem in the finale. It was very much set up as Jack versus Sawyer, especially when it comes to Kate being involved. But here we have this entire scene, right, where Jack is trying to like find some stuff in the remnants of the fuselage, and Sawyer's there harvesting medicine, which will also become a storyline this season. And Sawyer's reveling in it. He's like, y'all, you're a city boy. Me, I'm in the wild.
Yeah.
But it turns out that, to your point, his ass is writing checks that can't catch, especially when it comes to his shooting ability, because he's the guy, right? They'll be like, fine, Doc, you can't put this guy out of his misery.
To do it.
Yeah, I'll do it myself. And then he completely bungles it. To your point, he puts him in even worse pain. So Jack does have to become that murderer that he doesn't want to be, and ends up putting the Marshal out of his misery.
Yeah, he euthanizes him. And then I think for Kate, obviously being the central figure of this episode, just a person who has like mystery upon mystery, sometimes frustratingly so. I think having finished season one, there's probably some measure of frustration around the Kate specific episodes, I would gather. I think certainly that was the case in the real time of watching the show, despite the fact that she's so like ride or die and capable through so much of season one. But there's, her ability to lie, and to herself and to other people, I think comes into sharp focus here in this episode. But one of the other storylines that's bubbling underneath Tabula Rasa is that Vincent the dog is missing. Vincent is the dog that licks Jack at the start of the show. He shows up in the jungle. He's like, what's this dog doing here? And then we're not sure what happens to him, but Walt is missing his dog. Michael, who is a new father, has not been in this boy's life for very long, is trying to find the dog. and leave it to a certain boxman
Mm-hmm.
to find the dog, which I think brings us nicely into Walkabout.
Yeah, that's the other thing as well, is that, again, because this is an ensemble show and we're getting to know so many characters, season one, and this is something Josh and I picked up on when we were watching it for Down the Hatch, does a really nice job of kind of weaving future storylines through B plots, C plots, and other episodes. Tabula Rasa, for instance, ends with this interesting sort of pan around shot of the mysterious John Locke sitting on the beach. And I think, especially if you're binging it, it really sets up Walkabout perfectly.
Yeah, a great shot, an iconic shot of Terry O'Quinn, who's the actor who plays Locke, who hopefully you know. He has been in so many things and is always great, but he is really, really excellent. An Emmy-winning performance from Terry O'Quinn.
We won't say which one.
On Lost, yes. And so my favorite quiet moment with Locke is the orange peel in the pilot. Is my favorite quiet moment from the pilot, where he like smiles like a clown at Kate while she's taking shoes off of a dead body, and then he frowns when he doesn't get a reaction out of her, and maybe is like, maybe I shouldn't be smiling at people having fun with cadavers. Oh, maybe she's not having fun with a cadaver.
But as we'll find out, Locke has every reason to smile.
He has every reason to smile, but also I think even beyond the reason he has to smile here specifically, one of the things that we get from Locke in Walkabout is that, like, this dude's a little bit Colonel Curtsy, right? Like, there's a little bit of like, okay, Boxman.
Colonel Curtsy?
You know, he does like a little Colonel Curtsy every time he shows up on screen. New bits every single time we do Down the Hatch. And so, like, he has like, there's a couple of screws that seem to be loose. Like, he is a man that seems to be filled with lots of wisdom. And when you're just engaging with him one-on-one or in like broader contexts, he seems to be a character who knows a thing or two about a lot. Like a lot of different subjects, whether it's like Michelangelo and trebuchets and whatever. But this is also
People
a man
who climb Mount Everest.
But this is also a man who maybe like his like social game is lacking significantly, as we come to see in the flashback. That he is a man who has is in a wheelchair for reasons unknown, and is unable to walk, despite the fact that he is this guy who works at a box manufacturing company in a pretty low rung position, who is going to go on this walkabout or try to go on this walkabout and is not allowed to because he lied by omission about his condition, only to crash on this island and find that now he can walk again. This was an enormous episode of Lost in the real time. I think if the pilot didn't grab people and if Tabula Rasa is a little bit of a step down from there, Walkabout is like remembered historically as the episode that it's like, okay, irrefutably, something mystical is happening on the island, because how else to explain the fact that this man can walk? And Locke, played by this incredibly accomplished actor, is just such a ride throughout season one, let alone whatever comes in the future. And it really begins here in Walkabout.
Yeah, I mean, I think that ending sequence is up there with some of the best that the show has to offer, right? Because there is this entire, one of the big problems of the week, which you get a lot in season one, which is, first off, there are too many BODYSs, to quote Hurley. They're going to have to dispose of them eventually. And then also the need for food has arisen. And so John Locke's going to step in for the latter portion, because again, this is the guy that came with the big suitcase full of big ass knives and talks about how he's going to go hunt down some boar. And so that's going to be what his entire episode's pursuit is. But everything ends with sort of just like the funereal burning of all these bodies. And one of those things that is being burned is a wheelchair. And we're going to get this entire sequence alongside it of just the way it was so craftily shot. Throughout the flashbacks, Locke is always sitting down or lying in bed. And if you don't necessarily know, and some people were able to pick up on it before the big reveal, and good on them, I was not one of them, but once it's revealed that he is in a wheelchair and he's screaming, "You can't tell me what to do," you get an immediate realization, at least in the moment, of who this man is. And that the way that the previous episode ends is the concept of a tabula rasa, which is like, on this island, maybe we can erase everything we were before we came here, and we can rewrite a new name for ourselves. And no one represents that more honestly than someone like John Locke, who's almost given a new lease on life. He is now able to embrace what he had wanted to do and was denied because of his past in Australia. And so we will see, for better and for worse, how much this, to your point, Heart of Darkness ends up really sucking him in.
Yeah, because, again, Locke is a guy who seems like he knows so much, not just about like a million topics, but specifically seems really connected to the island.
Yes.
There's the moment where he has this showdown with the monster who is still unseen. And he is going to say in the very next episode, which we should talk about, I looked into the eye. I looked into the eye of this island, and what I saw was beautiful. So Locke feels very connected to the place. But as the season develops and we start to get into the Hatch stuff, and certainly when the Boone moment happens, it's like, why? I've done so much. I'm doing everything. I've done everything you asked me to do. Why have you done this? So he is just he is also sort of this, he's this great example of a believer who believes so fervently in a cause, but it sometimes feel like that cause doesn't believe in me. And so what do you do with that faith? How do you go through that? And so that's why that question at the end, this conversation at the end of season 1 that we're going to get into about people of science versus people of faith, is a hallmark theme of the show. And the person of faith is really, really well represented by John Locke. So let's talk about the person of science, and let's talk about the very first flashback episode for Jack in White Rabbit. And in the visual version of this podcast, what Mike and I are looking at is a man with his back turned to us. He is wearing a suit, and he is wearing white sneakers. And this will be the White Rabbit of the episode, as this episode of Lost focuses on the more obsessive qualities of Jack Shephard, Mike.
Yeah, he does not know how to let things go, as his very complicated father will tell him. So, yes, this is Jack's episode after he had a little bit of a shared focus in the pilot. And it turns out that Jack is a complicated guy, sweetheart, to quote the man that will vie for Kate's affections alongside him. Jack is, again, sort of reconciling with whether or not he should be the leader of this group, in which case now the problem of the week is that they're having issues with the water. Water's starting to run out. And speaking of water, Jack has some difficulties with it because he does fail to save someone. Someone drowns in the ocean. And so unfortunately, Jack is starting to lose it a little bit, because he is also, from his perspective, haunted by the visage of this older man. And it is revealed over the course of this episode that this older man is Jack's father.
Right.
And that Jack had this, again, very complicated relationship with him. We see from a very young age that Christian Shepherd, which is the name of Jack's father, was very hard on him, saying he just doesn't have what it takes. And then we find out that Jack's reason for being on Australia was a rather morose one, in that basically Jack's dad had gone on a bender, went to Australia, and by the time Jack had gotten there to try to find him, he was deceased. And to really add insult to injury, Josh, they lost Christian Shepherd's body supposedly on the plane.
Right. So Christian Shepherd is they've checked him in, and then they go, and Jack searches for this ghost throughout the episode of White Rabbit, and eventually he is going to come across these caves with water. So that's great. That's a great discovery. But when he finds his father's casket, it's empty. And so this opens up questions about yo, is this show doing ghost stuff?
Well, yeah, because especially, again, he is following this image of his father to the point that he almost dies because of it. He nearly flies off a cliff, Wile E. Coyote style, but the person to save him is John Locke, who gives him this pep talk that leads to arguably the most seminal Jack Shephard moment of the entire series, which is this big speech he gives that if we can't live together, we're going to die alone.
We're going to die alone. Yeah, it's the big thing. And I love the speech that Locke has when he meets with Jack. You compare this first moment between the two of them and their later moments in season 1, where again, Jack tackles and beats the crap out of Locke at one point at Boone's funeral. And you compare these two things of this is the person of science and the person of faith maybe being able to speak a common language, and they're not able to really dialogue with each other by the end of the season. If this is a real ghost, this is either this is a pretty nasty ghost, Mike, because
it's often nasty. They have unfinished business for very particular reasons.
It does seem like it's trying to lead Jack off a cliff, though I guess you could also make the argument that perhaps it's trying to lead Jack to the water source, because Jack would not have found the caves if not for this pursuit. So a really haunting episode. I believe this is the great Joe Garfine's favorite episode of Lost, or really one of them. She's written a paper on White Rabbit. Lots of themes, Alice in Wonderland themes. One of the beautiful things about Lost, especially in the real time, was like the literary comparisons and like the again, the homework to some degree. This was a homework show.
That's how I learned who Hieronymus Bosch was because Charlie's middle name was Hieronymus.
You know, so like you would do like bonus homework, like you would want to like learn more about Locke. So you looked into the philosophy of John Locke or Rousseau and all of these other things. But like White Rabbit being in here evokes Alice in Wonderland. How does Alice in Wonderland map onto Lost? If you can go back and check some of like the real time writing about this show from, again, like Doc Jensen at EW, there's just so much great writing about Lost and so many great reading recommendations that emanate out from Lost.
Yeah,
so
you can make a book club from Lost.
You certainly could. So that's White Rabbit, which leads us to another great piece of media, The House of the Rising Sun. As we get into our
one of the many punny episode titles when it comes to Lost.
It's not quite like John Kierhofer levels, Mike, of like every single like Survivor challenge has like a rock, like a rock and roll tie-in, or most of them do. But it comes up now and then. And The House of the Rising Sun is the first of 2 Quan-centric episodes of Lost this season. This first one is focusing on Sun and her relationship with Jin, Yunjin Kim and Daniel Dae Kim, who play these characters who we have not talked about yet.
Yeah.
And I think like Jin especially is sort of a character that people really dislike through most of Lost season 1, and not in no small part because of this episode, I think.
Well, even before that, right? He's the one that tells his wife on a tropical deserted island, hey, button up your sweater a little bit so men don't peep at you. So yeah, Jin and Sun, I mean, we talk about, especially again for 2004, the remarkable diversity that existed within this cast. We'll talk about this especially in a few episodes with a character like Saeed. But Jin and Sun are Korean. And we think initially that they have no connection with the main brunt of our cast because they do not speak English. But it turns out that Sun is harboring a bit of a secret in that she actually can. And that is because
she does speak English.
Yes, which is a joke on that. Back in the day, Josh and I would read entries from the series Bible, and they love to do random capitalization
that the creators made to like keep themselves organized and on track.
And so for one reason, in the description of Sun as a character, they wrote speak English in all caps. And so that's how we kind of read it as
English.
But so Sun is revealed that her and Jin, their marriage is on the rocks, to say the least, prior to taking off from Sydney to LA. That Jin was working for her father. Of course, we'll find out the Jin side of things coming up in a little bit.
From Sun's perspective and the viewer's initial perspective, dude's a hitman. Oh my God. Like this guy shows up with blood on his hands.
And what happened to like the sweet young man that gave her a white flower when they were courting each other? And so Sun was making plans to leave him. In fact, the plan is as sudden as at the airport, there's going to be a taxi. Just walk out and take it off to parts unknown. But whether it's due to just, as the picture shows, that flash of the man that she fell in love with, she decides to stay. And that has brought her to the island where, yeah, that violence is spilling over in a very different way. As it turns out that Jin is going to beat the snot out of Michael, which becomes a little bit of also like a sort of odd recurring relationship storyline this season as well, which was there was a brief portion of time where like, I don't know if they were trying to imply that Michael and Sun were flirting with each other, but it was certainly a friendly relationship.
This is a storyline that doesn't really go anywhere, I think is something that is fair to say. I think it's worth highlighting the things that like, I wouldn't think too hard about that for the people who are watching the first time. I think this is one of the more melodramatic subplots of season 1 is this sort of manufactured love triangle between Jin, Sun, and Michael. Certainly by the end of season 1, it's really clear that there's a lot of love still there between Jin and Sun. And so like this opening story of like, there's this flirtmance that's going on with Michael and Sun. It's not a huge part of the show. It kind of just, like it happens here for some early drama. And Michael and Jin's relationship also gets very interesting, of course, towards the end of season 1. But here, like, yeah, it's fisticuffs. It's a handcuffed Jin who cannot communicate with these people. It's Michael with a fire axe having to liberate Jin from being handcuffed to this thing. And for the rest of this season, he's got this handcuff on his wrist, and it all comes down to this watch, this watch, little man.
Oh no, I don't want to. Michael should have probably not known how Jin got that watch on the plane.
This point of pride. Yeah.
I love House of the Rising Sun.
This is one of Mike's very favorite episodes.
Yeah. Well, not just because of the character stuff, which I find very rich, especially in the hindsight of like knowing that Jin's not as terrible as initially presented, but it's a discovery of a seminal piece of Lost setting, especially in the first season, which are the caves. That after Jack was kind of led to them, he was led to water and he's going to drink it. He decides to start telling people about it. And we make a very mysterious discovery here, Josh, that there are 2 human skeletons just chilling out, as Locke calls them, our very own Adam and Eve.
Their very own Adam and Eve. So there's a man and a woman skeleton. Their remains are in this cave where we're going to partially move the setting here in just a little while. And I think that this is probably some big questions on the board at this point, and on the board at this point in the show are like, guys, where are we? What the hell is up with this monster? Why is Locke suddenly able to walk? Are there ghosts, as we see with Christian? And then I think here it's like, what's up with Adam and Eve? I think like becomes sort of like that like 5th big question if we are like writing these down as we go. By the end of season 1, certainly we don't have an answer, but Mike, do you remember in the real time if you had a theory about this? Because I remember like my dorm room crowd of watching Lost, like this was a big one for us. Like, who are these people?
Yeah, I think especially as season 1 went along, I feel like the prevailing theory was like time traveling Jack and Kate.
Right.
That, they somehow spend all their time on this island, but like their bodies.
Because there's something about like the clothes are not decayed nearly as much as the cadavers themselves.
And there's also
the
fun like cyclical nature as well of almost Back to the Future style. Like, wait a minute, those are the older versions of ourselves. We're going to be stuck on this island forever. Because again, there's, to your point in the inaugural episode, a very Gilligan's Island feel on this first season of Lost.
Yeah. So speaking of the caves become a bigger deal in the next episode, The Moth, which is not brought to you by any public radio station, though does prominently feature.
We'll talk about a radio tower later on, maybe.
Music, though, that could be broadcasted on a radio station, as this is the first Charlie episode. Charlie played, of course, by Dominic Monaghan, who is probably like sort of the most famous person on Lost at this moment in time. Again, it's 2004. We're shortly removed from the Lord of the Rings trilogy. It's Mary, Mike.
Yes, though he is far from Mary, as yes, he was one of our other shared POV characters. It really was him, Jack, and Kate going out into the fuselage to go find the pilot. And we find out in that episode that Charlie is a heroin addict. And that is really going to come to a head in this episode as, Jack ends up getting trapped in a cave-in. Charlie is going to try to help him while he is also dealing with a lot of withdrawal. But of course, the person to help him is none other but the sage himself, John Locke.
It's the sage John Locke who's like, all right, let's try and not do heroin anymore. And so he like tries to Sherpa Charlie through withdrawal. That began in House of the Rising Sun, and it really continues here and comes to a head in The Moth as Charlie's got like a touch of the golem in him right now. The bloody rock god is pretty upset. And we get to see in his backstory that, we already heard this earlier in the season, in the pilot, that he's the bass player in Drive Shaft. And Kate says, "You are good." And he says, "We are good." But we come to find out.
Bit of a one-hit wonder.
Bit of a one-hit wonder. You all, everybody, probably like anyone who watched Lost in the real time could sing that for you. Not the full lyrics, but at least the you all, everybody part. It played in Alias season 5, I think, or season 4 was airing at the same time as like another J.J. Abrams joint and just like a gesture at something of a shared universe. So I thought that was pretty fun back in the day. But Charlie's band broke up. His brother Liam was the reason why Charlie got into drugs. Charlie's brother cleans his life up. Charlie's life continues to plummet. He goes to Sydney in order to woo his brother back on tour. It doesn't work. And so Charlie winds up on the plane that gets him here onto the island. And like, this is really like a character building episode for Charlie. I think it also like it's strengthening the bond between Jack and Kate, because Kate doesn't want to move to the caves. A bunch of people have moved to the caves because that's where the water is. We're going to bring the people to the water.
But there are some people that are like, no, we're going to get rescued, and that would mitigate any attempts to rescue us. So we're going to stay out here on the beach.
Right. So Kate is going to find out that Jack has been involved in this cave-in, and she's going to be really upset about that.
Yeah.
But there's also this operation that Kate is a part of,
right?
Which is this like we're going to try and like trigger these walkie-talkies through like firecrackers, signals, Mike.
They're going to try to triangulate where this distress call is coming from, and it actually sets up the next 2 episodes, because obviously 2 episodes from now we will find the French woman, which has really been like Saeed's white whale this entire time since he heard it. But also, to your point, Kate is supposed to be part of this operation. She runs away, and the person to surprisingly step in is honestly one of the biggest assholes we've experienced on the show so far in Sawyer. And we will see as soon as next episode that, maybe he's a bit more complicated than we initially thought.
Yeah. We also will find out by the end of season 1, of course, who's the person that knocks Saeed out here on this operation, that it's Locke. This is one of my least favorite twists of the show. Because like, how do you like map that onto like how the moth plays out and Locke's availability to Charlie? How did he just like do?
And not only that, I think it's a little extreme, maybe for Locke, like when he becomes fully hatch obsessed in the second half of the season. But this is episode 7.
This guy's not knocking people out, I don't think. Yeah. So not my favorite twist, but there you go. That's what's happening here. Let's move on to the next episode, Confidence Man, as we are going to be talking about the most confident man on the show up to this point, Josh Holloway as Sawyer.
Or is that his real name, Josh?
Or is that his real name? We'll get it by the end of the season. James Ford is who this guy is.
Who the hell is James Ford?
Who the hell is James Ford? But he is James Ford, but he is also Sawyer, and it's a name we come to find out that he took from the man who ruined his life, who stole all my daddy's money. And made you shoot my mommy. And we get like the letter that he's carrying around. Sawyer's whole deal is he's trying to find the person that caused his life to fall apart when he was a child. And I have a soft spot for this episode because I think that there's just so many intense moments in it. You referenced the jungle of mystery, the bamboo torture that happens here,
which again sets really nicely up the next episode where Saeed is going to kind of exile himself because he realized that he has dipped into this incredibly violent triggering past that he never wanted to engage in.
Yeah. Sawyer is probably like a consensus least favorite character on the show at this moment. And like, if that's starting to turn, some of that is starting to turn probably here because like you sort of begin to understand maybe a little bit of why this dude is such a prick.
Right. So basically we find out
doesn't absolve him, but
I mean, this man is definitely aggressive in certain parts, but he's more so self-destructive at the end of the day. Then we find out that almost he's taken into the footsteps of the man that ruined his life, that outside of this, he has become a con man. But I wouldn't even say he has a heart as much as he has like one weakness. And it is that he's about to con this family out of its money.
It's eating ice cream off of women's bare midriffs.
Yes, we did a whole routine about him talking about his bedroom routine where he's laying with a woman prior to him doing the whole not to say gambit, considering the Josh Holloway discourse involving that, but like, oh no, my briefcase full of money flew open. I guess you have to work with me now. But as he's about to con this family out of all their money, he sees this little child, which obviously flashes back to him of like, I can't ruin this family's life the way that mine is ruined. It doesn't stop Sawyer, though, from just being so miserable in this episode, where the big conflict is that Shannon is asthmatic and she is really having a lot of problems. And Sawyer, again, has hoarded all of these materials. He's sort of set up his own general store and he refuses to give over the medicine. And so it forces Jack and Saeed by proxy to basically get it out of him, while simultaneously we'll explore another interesting dynamic in Jack and Sun, which, as we'll see later on in the season, becomes a nice sort of like doctor and nurse dynamic.
Yeah, Island ER. And then, like, does Sawyer have a beating heart underneath all of that tough exterior? And like his terms being like, "Kiss ought to do it," is like, it's gross. It's really gross. But like, it also like,
especially after she does it, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm still not going to say anything."
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't do it. You know, like it definitely speaks to that. Like this guy has like a desire to be loved, but like as much as people around him seem to hate him, it seems like none of them hate him more than he hates himself.
Exactly.
So
to the point where he went through, he could have stopped all this by like really saying that he didn't want to do it, but he felt like for whatever reason he deserved to be tortured to the extent that he was by Sayid.
Right. So like he is, as he says in the pilot, a complicated guy. You know, he's not just somebody who like sneaks a gun and shoots a polar bear. Like there's some stuff that's going on with Sawyer. And I think people who don't love him in season 1, we'll see if that changes as the show continues at all. But Sayid is not a big Sawyer fan, and then Sayid is not a big Sayid fan, Mike, because he has tortured Sawyer. It is a thing that he has sworn he would never do again, which is explored in Solitary, which is the first Sayid episode, focusing on Naveen Andrews as Sayid and showing his backstory, that he was part of the Republican Guard. Yes, and that he was a torturer. And this is something that's revealed in the pilot and gets explored here in greater detail, that one of the people that he is torturing when he is part of the Republican Guard is this young woman, Nadia, who is his childhood sweetheart, who is now on the other side of this violent conflict, who he comes to realize, what am I doing? I should be with her. And a love story begins. This sort of like star-crossed, can I ever be back with her? And as we find out in season 1, like he's going to go to Australia with the promise that he can get reconnected with Nadia. And then poor guy's going to crash on an island. And so he's been waiting years and years and years to reconnect with this woman. And that love story and the flashbacks are starting to be expressed here.
Yeah, so we find out that Sayid is maybe one of the biggest bleeding hearts of this entire show. And
we've talked about him as like the most romantic character.
Oh, well, I mean, listen, as we'll experience with, what he may be doing towards the end of the season, that much is certainly true. That this is a guy who, despite being one of the most intelligent characters on the show, if you say like Locke sunk all of his points into wisdom, I think Sayid sunk all of his points into intelligence. And that he really is the professor, if we're going with the Gilligan's Island comparison, to the point where he decides that he is going to start trying to figure out exactly what's going on with this French woman. And finally, he comes face to face with her. It is the enigmatic Danielle Rousseau, played by the late Mira Furlan.
Yes, unfortunately, she has recently passed away in the last couple of years.
Who turns out to be someone who was also stranded on the island and unfortunately was driven quite mad by it. She ends up tying Sayid up in the jungle of mystery in a very different way, and that she kind of keeps him in her hideout. He kind of then gets
close talks him to oblivion.
Yeah, he gets the shoe on the other foot in a way, and that he is now sort of like at her whims, though he is eventually able to escape by, I think, being able to remark a bit upon her own tragic past, which, not to spoil too much, but we will certainly get into at a later date. But the big thing that brings it home in this episode is the fact that Danielle Rousseau is going to drop a key piece of mythos, which is that there are whispers out there in the jungle, that there could be others that exist on the island. And Sayid just writes this off initially as the ravings of a mad woman, but the episode ends with him running out into the jungle and there being a sonic soundscape, if you will, Josh,
indeed,
of whispers around him.
He goes into the green zone.
Yeah, which does make you wonder, to the point about White Rabbit. Okay, was she being true? Or is Sayid starting to succumb to whatever might be happening to Rousseau?
Right. Are folks hallucinating, or is what they're experiencing actually what they're experiencing? And, like this really interlocks with the whole point of science versus faith, and that question that's being asked on the show by the end of the season. But like, we know what Sayid hears because we experience it with Sayid, is all these little whispers. And a really fun thing to track over a first time of watching Lost was like, what are the whispers? I think that's like the new big question on the board after Adam and Eve, is like, what are the whispers? What's up with that? There were people who would like transcribe what the whispers were saying.
Yeah, and like sometimes it was being played backwards.
Like sometimes it seemed like it was just gobbledygook, but then other times it was like, okay, does that have any kind of like actual clue as to what the hell is happening on this show? So I think like just for like safety's sake, as you're watching this for the first time and it's been 20 years and there's spoilers abound on the internet, like I wouldn't search any of this stuff until you're
No.
finished with the show. But it was a really fun thing in the real time of like, what are the whispers? So if you want to do your own detective work and like pause it down and try and like transcribe that stuff, I would encourage that, but don't seek it out, I would say.
Yeah, I'll also say Solitary Sports, one of the most iconic B plots in Lost.
Yes, I was gonna get into this.
And that so many B plots in these first batch of episodes, again, function around the basic survival skills. But this one's a bit of an exception purposely, where Hurley is going to approach Jack and say, like, yeah, we've taken care of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but what's missing there is fun.
Yeah.
And so we are going to get a good amount of our Losties building a golf course amongst the Green Hill Zone.
Yeah. So we get the Lost golf course, which we do not utilize nearly enough, but we do see again from time to time, and is I think one of the show's best examples of. I apologize. I will probably botch the pronunciation of Kualoa Ranch, which was one of the prominent filming locations on Oahu for Lost. That just about all of Lost is filmed in Hawaii, with the exception of one scene later on, which is going to be filmed far away from Hawaii, but everything else in studios, on location. And this is a visitable location if you ever find yourself in Oahu. I have been here specifically where Hurley's golf course is, and it's awesome. So cool. But it's just like we have not even talked really about Hurley yet because his centric episode comes so late in the season. But the great Jorge Garcia, who is on this show specifically because he had previously been in an episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm where he deals weed to Larry David. The creators of Lost saw that, thought it was hilarious, and wanted him to read for the show. And he wasn't right for any of the existing characters. So they created Hurley. This is a story for a lot of these characters. I believe Sun and Jin may have come from this as well, where Younjin Kim was reading for Kate. So there were instances where like some of these actors read for other characters. And in the case of Hurley, it's like, this guy is so great, we need to create a character around him. And it ends up being sort of like mirrored in this solitary storyline of the golf stuff is like, what are we missing? Fun. Like we're missing just like a character who's like, dude, what is going on? And Hurley is just like a great audience surrogate for so many of these questions and so much of the vibe of the show of like, we're getting chased by polar bears and monsters and stuff. And like and people are like dying of asthma. Like this, people getting caved in. Like everyone's scared. Can we play golf, please? And so some of like the show's greatest moments of whimsy happen because of this character. And you and I really love the golf storyline. And I think a lot of people do as well. That when I encourage people to go and watch Lost, like people are like, but I heard the ending's bad, or I heard it's not satisfying. It's like, put that all aside, find out for yourself if any of that's true. The vibes are immaculate.
Yeah.
And like, if you didn't like the golf scene on in Solitary, if you didn't like that subplot, then at least we like Lost probably for different reasons.
Right. And that's the thing as well, is that, listen, there have certainly been some interesting pieces that have come out since Lost Resurgence on Netflix of like, these are the episodes you can skip or the plots you can skip. And I think there's certainly been some discourse as well, and especially in the wake of like 6 episode seasons of, hey, does anyone remember like the 22 episode order where there might be filler episodes? And this isn't a filler episode because, again, one of the reasons why I love Solitary is there is so much about Saeed as a character. There's so much about, obviously, the mythology of the island. But then there's really good filler plots on Lost. Now, some of them aren't always great. We can certainly get into those down the line. But there's moments like this that I think also, while maybe quote unquote filler, especially once we get to know Hurley a bit more in numbers, serve as a really nice setup for a character that has been largely ancillary to the plot.
Let's talk about another character who has been largely ancillary to the plot. And let's open up like 2 more really big questions on the board as we go to Raised by Another. This is the first Claire-centric episode, the only Claire-centric episode of season 1 of Lost, featuring Emily DeRavin as Claire, the sole actual Australian character apparently the only actual Australian who was on the flight from Sydney to Los Angeles.
Despite the fact that there are so many people trying to do Australian accents around her.
A lot of casting of people who are not actually Australian, and some do it better than others, Mike.
Including the person who plays her asshole boyfriend, who was Todd, right, in Wedding Crashers?
So Thomas, I do believe that's correct, that he was in Wedding Crashers. We are going to meet a psychic, Richard Malkin as well. And Claire is the pregnant chick, as Hurley will probably call her a couple of times. She's developed this relationship with Charlie, where Charlie seems to be like a little more into things than Claire is.
Yeah, there's like the meet cute storyline where all Claire wants is peanut butter, and Charlie will come in with an imaginary jar, and they'll have some squeam moments together, but things will turn squeamish as it turns out Claire's having some freaky deaky dreams.
Yes. So she's freaking out. She sees like this thing with John Locke with a white eye and a black eye.
Yeah, and a crib.
Yeah, which, again, like there's a lot of this imagery of like light versus dark, black versus white.
One is light, one is dark. That's how he describes Mount Cala, the old backgammon, the oldest game.
Yeah, so he describes backgammon to Walt, showing one side is light, the other is dark, and here he has a light eye and a dark eye. Yeah, interesting. Maybe just worth keeping that in mind. And so here Claire is having this vision, and she's also having these dreams that she is being stuck with a hypodermic needle. But are they dreams? Because as we come to find out over the course of this episode, there is a man who is part of the group who's introduced in the previous episode, sort of stealthily, again, to Mike's point, that like Lost did a really good job of like setting something up in one episode, and then like in the preceding episode, they knock it down. And so here comes William Mapother, who's Tom Cruise's cousin. As Ethan Rom, which is an anagram for other man. And he is one of these people that Rousseau warned about. Rousseau said, there are others here, and he wasn't on the plane, is what Hurley says.
Which is interesting. This is one of the rare intersections of an A and a B plot where Hurley decides to take it upon himself. He finds the flight manifest, and he's basically going to go around and like take attendance and take down personal details. And as Charlie is comforting Claire in the middle of the jungle, he'll hurriedly run to Jack and reveal that one person that he just surveyed was not on the plane. And indeed, as rain pours down in the jungle for the infinite time on Lost, we see Ethan Rom creepily staring at them middle distance saying, hello there.
Hello there. Not as friendly as Obi-Wan when he says it. So we'll pick up on that very, very shortly after this. But that was like a huge moment. We're like, oh, okay, get me to the next episode right away. Like, could not click faster on next episode.
Yeah, but we should say that there is also a bit of a mystery around Claire, as yes, she does go to see Richard Malkin, and he gives her this sort of like prophecy in a way that she obviously had this. She was pregnant with the child by her boyfriend, who decides that he doesn't want to be a father, breaks up with her. She's about to give up the baby for adoption, but she is given again this word by the psychic that her baby will be, for lack of a better term, raised by another, and that there's danger that surrounds her, but no one should raise the baby except for her. And so we see that she was initially going to sign the baby away for adoption, and she chooses to heed Malkin's odd warning, decides not to go, and takes him up on his offer, which is, hey, get on this plane and go fly to LA.
Yeah. So questions that emerge from this episode. What's up with the baby? Why is the baby, who we'll know by the end of the season, is named Aaron?
Turnip Head.
What's up with Aaron? What's up with Turnip Head? Why can't he be raised by anyone else? And then another huge one is, what? There's others here? Who the fuck are they?
Yeah, that was really the question. Was like, oh my god, because yes, like there are others. You think they just might be again these otherworldly whisperers, but no, if they're actual people, That is scary AF, and
That's
it's gonna
terrifying.
get it's even gonna get scarier AF as soon as next week's episode.
Yes, the very next episode, all the best cowboys have daddy issues,
Yeah,
or as Mike and I call it, all the best daddies is what we've called it.
Our first repeat flashback
Yes.
episode.
Yes, so you will come, of course, to see across season 1, and you shouldn't be surprised to know that we will do similar stuff over the course of the show, that characters will be back in focus. You know, it's not just like you got that flashback episode, your story is resolved. These people's stories will unfurl across the show. Damon Lindelof and Carlton Cuse used to talk about Lost as like a tapestry. And by the time the show is done, you'll have this huge tapestry that has everything stitched together. It's just a lot of the information is going to come out of sequence. So sometimes flashbacks that you see later in the show will have occurred earlier than the first flashback you saw with that character, which is much the case in All the Best Cowboys Have Daddy Issues, as the Jack storyline involves what happened with his father that caused him to go on his bender, which is that he operated on someone while he was drunk. The person died, and Christian tried to get his son to be a good boy and not talk about it. And Jack tells the medical board what has happened, and presumably that was very bad for Christian's career. And whether or not that is explicitly what leads to his bender, it certainly doesn't help. So Jack may be carrying some guilt about that as he is going around, but I think probably like the bigger reason why that's that flashback exists here is that they find out that Charlie and Claire have been taken.
Yes,
we need to find Charlie and Claire. And so these two divergent search parties break out. One of them is John and Boone, who we'll talk about shortly.
Yes.
And the other is Jack and Kate. And Jack and Kate's search takes them to Ethan. Jack gets the shit kicked out of him by Ethan. Ethan says, if you do not stop following me, I will kill one of them. Jack is relentless, as we have discovered. He cannot let things go. And so as he goes further and continues the pursuit, he finds Charlie hanging by his neck, and it seems like Charlie is dead. And can Jack like fix mistakes? Can Jack, go back and change things? Mike, I think, is a big theme with Jack Shephard.
Yeah.
And here he goes up and tries to save Charlie, and it seems like a fruitless effort. But for whatever it's worth, Jack is a persistent guy, and he persists, and he hits, and he hits, and he hits, and Charlie springs back to life, to the point that Mike and I used to joke that Jack might have the superpower of being able to just like punch life back into people.
super CPR, spelled CUPER.
Yes, that's
because
right.
I mean, it is an incredible scene. I mean, I'm sure everyone experienced it watching it for the first time. Like, there's that holy shit aspect of, oh my God, to your point, Dominic Monaghan had the biggest name to him coming into the show, and they're gonna kill him off at what they don't, I think what they would call now as the mid-season finale. That's what this was for Lost. Lost takes a little bit under a month-long break for the holidays right after this, and we'll talk about maybe a major reason why that's so climactic with the other party here. But yeah, it's a wild scene, and Kate is like weeping, telling Jack to stop, that he's dead. The rain is pouring down, and then all of a sudden Charlie surges back to life, and it's really a surge of life for Jack as well, because this is a guy who the entire episode, right, has had two of his people kidnapped under his nose. He's been told many times, like, I have the upper hand on you. Do not keep getting up. We saw this is the first Jack flashback scene, is Jack as a kid keeps getting beat up, and he keeps getting back up, even though he knows it's just going to lead to more violence against him. And on paper, he just lost somebody because of that persistence. But he has a small W right here, right now, even though Charlie is quite shell-shocked. He was able to save one of them. And it leads to, again, just the beautiful culmination of the scene where, like, the three of them, the three people that were previously in this jungle many days ago trying to rescue the pilot, are now in a completely different world of danger as just the rain is pouring down on them.
Yeah. I remember watching this. This is one of my most vivid early memories of watching Lost in the real time with my buddy Pete, aka Coconut Pete, who appeared in the initial Lost Lives podcasts 10 years ago. And I remember him and I being like, just like our jaws on the ground, that it seemed like Charlie had died here. And then when he was like safe, we were like, all right, well, we even talked about Lost in Survivor terms back then. We're like, okay, well, that dude now has the immunity necklace because they cannot touch him after that.
Right.
And so like we felt like really good about that at the very least. But it was such a traumatic moment that like whatever safety we felt the show had bought Charlie and putting him so close to death was just like greatly outweighed by just how deeply traumatic that whole experience was.
And so, not
yeah.
only again is there this big moment where a character nearly dies, another one has been kidnapped for a portion of time, and Jack has again a significant part of his character revealed. But Josh, the biggest set piece of the back half of Lost season 1 gets its first reveal at the end of this episode.
And now you know why this podcast is called Down the Hatch.
Because we love to swallow things.
We love to just like drink and eat things and talk about it. No, it's because there's this hatch in the middle of the jungle that is going to be excavated over the course of season 1 that is discovered here in the pursuit of Charlie and Claire and Ethan by Locke and Boone, who we'll talk about more shortly, that they find this hatch in the ground after like Locke has predicted the rainfall and all this other stuff that really for a guy like Boone, who's just trying to matter here, really makes Locke look like a rock star. A lock star. And so he throws him a mag light when they're about to turn around and leave, and it hits this like hard metal. And there is the hatch. And this becomes the next really big question on the board. And the really big question of season 1 is we could phrase it as what's in the hatch, but for the purposes of this podcast, what's down the hatch, right?
Exactly.
It's a Lost podcast that you should rate and review on your podcast player of choice. But in the context of Lost proper, we, even as we're talking about season 1, folks, still can't say because we don't know.
Because in one of maybe the most hair-pulling cliffhangers that the show and TV had ever done, after they finally blow apart the hatch after 11 episodes, all it shows is 2 of our main characters looking down it with nothing more.
So we'll talk about that shortly, but it was a huge thing to leave the audience on.
It's metal. Metal shouldn't exist in the jungle. We've been living off of coconuts and papayas for the past 11 episodes.
It was metal, and it's like it's got a window. Like, what is this? So the excavation of that is really exciting. And I think for me, in that month-long hiatus, I could not wait to find the answer. So instead, when we come back, we get whatever the case may be, which is the episode where Kate goes around looking for an airplane, a toy airplane.
Right. So basically what happens is Kate and Sawyer are canoodling, and while swimming in this picturesque waterfall, which will become
not
a little
full canoodling, but
not
like
full.
Adjacent canoodling.
A little al dente canoodling.
Canoodle-ish, yeah.
But in this waterfall, which will become a popular setting throughout Lost, they find a case of guns that belongs to the marshal. Again, the secret of Kate being a fugitive is only held by a few people. At this point, the information will become more public later on in the season. But this is an episode that is all about what to do with the guns. And honestly, the most savory part of this episode, and really that depends on your opinion of the relationship, is that Sayid and Shannon begin to get a bit closer as he got a bunch of maps from Rousseau's hideout that are all in French. And he asked for Shannon, who, if you remember from the pilot, is apparently
she speaks some French.
Yeah, she speaks some French, is the only person who knows French in this entire group. He asked her to translate, and she sings a nice version of La Mer.
It's whatever. This episode sucks.
It's regarded as, without not getting too far ahead, definitely one of like the worst episodes.
This is one of my least favorite episodes of the show. I think that this is almost a skippable episode if there are such things, except for, to Mike's point, it puts Sayid and Shannon on the path towards each other. Like if you just hopped into the next episode, it would be a little weird that suddenly they seem to be tight. But also, it introduces these guns, and the guns are going to go off, right? Like we will see that with
Chekhov's guns,
with the Ethan stuff in a little while. So like you could probably just like tell a friend, like in this episode, there's guns. They find them, and also Sayid and Shannon start getting into each other. And also there's like a little toy airplane that Kate really cares about. That'll go off by the end of the season as well.
And there's a frankly terrible flashback where like, it seems like Kate is robbing a bank, that she's falling in with the wrong crowd, but it turns out that all she wanted to do was rob a safe deposit box to get this toy airplane that's from the man she killed, which we'll find out later in her next flashback
It's the
episode.
man I loved. It's the man I killed. So we'll get that in a little bit.
I mean, Josh, I would say let's move on to more savory romantic aspects, but then we have Hearts and Minds.
Yeah, then we go to Hearts and Minds is the next episode. So like we're back with a couple of back-to-back bangers, Mike Bloom.
Don't say bangers with them.
As this is the episode where we get it's Boone's flashback, but it's like a Boone and Shannon episode. Boone played by the author of the Vampire Diaries. No, he was a participant. He was written about and then performed in the Vampire Diaries. Ian Somerhalder as Boone and Maggie Grace as Shannon.
Who, ironically enough, was not taken. That was Claire.
She was not taken. Claire was taken. But it also seems like maybe she was taken by John Locke, because in Hearts and Minds, it's Boone flashback. Boone is getting really obsessed with Saeed and Shannon getting closer together. He doesn't like it. At first, it seems like because he's an overprotective brother. But and so Locke seemingly kidnaps Shannon to like force Boone to like focus on excavating the hatch, but instead it's because like Locke, I guess it's consistent. Locke likes to knock people in the back of their heads. So like
apparently, but they take things one step further here in that he feeds Boone a paste that causes him to hallucinate, including a sequence that had people really excited in the moment because we think this is the first appearance of the monster really since the pilot or since the walkabout of like, oh great, this thing finally comes about. But no, it really was just a dream that is supposed to teach Boone to divorce his thoughts and romantic feelings towards Shannon. And yes, I say romantic feelings because we find out in the flashback that, listen, we're using clueless logic here. They're step siblings.
They're step siblings.
And so when Boone gets a distress call from Shannon that, you know, she has a boyfriend who is being abusive to her, he decides to show up and help her, only to find out that it's basically like an extortion trick to get money out of him. And so as the two of them kind of, you know, stew in their own misery in Sydney, they canoodle one night, and that is true canoodling.
This is true canoodling. Yeah.
But Shannon decides to basically say, like, yeah, we're never going to talk about this.
We're not going to talk about this ever again. And like, thankfully, as you'll see, because like Boone's not going to make it, right?
Yeah,
so like we don't have to talk about it for too long.
Takes that secret to the grave.
This is one of those moments where it's like, okay, maybe not every single character is either A, deserving of a flashback episode, or B, working. You know, these are maybe things that like Lost is not getting it 100% of the time, or even more than 100% by a couple of different numbers. You know, it's sometimes it's not working out. I think even the actors felt like this was really, really weird. Maggie Grace has told this story repeatedly that she like ate a ton of garlic for the makeout scene. So that it was like really gross. And they were like, you know, like just like punking each other on set because this whole thing was really, really weird and no one felt good about it.
Yeah, it's very strange. Again, this is one of those things where like the best thing about it is something that happens elsewhere on the island, which I believe this is one of the first big episodes for the Kate and Sun dynamic, where I believe this is the episode where she learns that Sun speaks English, right?
That sounds right to me. That sounds correct to me. I couldn't tell you with full authority, but that sounds correct to me. So that's going on. Is this the episode where Rose takes Charlie under her wing? We're kind of like in this like amorphous space. These three episodes sort of in my mind blend together a little bit.
That might be whatever the case may be, where Charlie is obviously incredibly shell-shocked by not only his near-death experience, but also losing Claire, someone that's very important to him, and Rose, who had her husband in the bathroom at the time that the crash happened, is still adamant to Jack in the first half of the season about how, no, her husband's still out there on the island. The two of them kind of commiserate over faith and over the idea of like still believing that your someone is out there.
L. Scott Caldwell, who plays Rose, who is a treasure. And I think like if anyone was like putting summoning circles around any of these characters to protect them from all evil and danger, like if people were placing like wards on these people, Rose would be high on the list of people that people wanted to protect. Rose is wonderful. Great character. Okay, well, so Hearts and Minds. So we got whatever the case may be. Hearts and Minds. We're back, baby. Lost is back. And it's kind of like, oh, man, mid-season sort of dragging. And I don't know that special does much to turn us upwards,
Not
Mike.
special, not such a special episode in that regard, though. it does focus on one of the, I mean, it's interesting because we just talked about Boone and Shannon. Let's talk about another pre-existing relationship
Yes.
prior to Oceanic 815, though
So,
not so pre-existing.
right.
Michael Dawson and Walt Lloyd.
Basically just barely.
Polar barely.
Polar barely, as yes, this episode is the return of a polar bear, and this is the first episode for Harold Perrineau as Michael, as far as his centric episodes, and Malcolm David Kelly, who plays Walt. So it is exploring why they are estranged, because we've already found out at this point that Michael and Walt do not have much of a relationship, that his mother died. Michael was not in the picture. Now he's back in the picture. We get to see that whole story and how that plays out. And we get introduced to Susan, who is Michael's ex,
and
who is Walt's mom.
Where basically the story is that like Michael and Susan were happy in love and she was pregnant, but then basically like Michael worked in construction. He had difficulty holding a job together. And so Susan basically said, like, yeah, this isn't working out. And also, you can't see your son again. I'm going to Australia for a job. And so Michael thought that was it until he gets a call that Susan is dead.
Yeah.
And basically, the man that she was married to, Brian, does not want to deal with Walt in particular, because here is yet another question to add onto the list. Josh, what is so quote unquote special about Walt?
Yes. So we get some like teases of this. Like we see that Walt seems to have a real connection with aminals, Mike. He can like summon birds into windows, it looks like.
What a superpower.
It also seems like because he's reading this DC comic book from Hurley that is like that prominently features a polar bear. He's reading it, and Michael's going to throw it in the fire because he gets mad at Walt, who's just like palling around with John Locke. And Michael hates John Locke. Michael is not a Locke guy.
No,
he tells him, he says, "You come near my son again, I'll kill you."
Right, because Michael is feeling not only a little territorial, but listen, Locke means well sometimes, but he is still kind of a creepy old man that's taking his son into the jungle. That, as the picture dictates, like, yeah, I'm going to teach you how to throw a knife at a tree, son.
Yeah, he doesn't love that. And then like he seems to manifest a really poorly CGI'd polar bear. And so like a polar bear tries to harangue Walt, and Michael and Locke have to pull off this like high flying expedition to like circus trapeze his way into saving Walt. And like this is like some of like the manufactured like network TV stuff. It's not great, but this question about Walt is certainly a huge one, Mike.
Yeah, well, and not only that, this does bring about what is going to become another big plot piece of the latter part of season 1, which is Michael decides in that moment he no longer wants his son trapped on this island with all these weird, depraved adults.
Yes.
He says, I'm going to build a raft. I've worked in construction. Let me be constructive. I'm going to try to put something together to sail off the island and get help, which is going to, again, inform pretty much all the main plot stuff outside of the hatch for the rest of the season.
It's like, can we escape? Can we get out of here? It's like, I heard that there's like 5 more seasons of this show, but maybe. So they're certainly going to attempt it. That goes well by the end of the season.
I mean, it goes really well for like one brief end of an episode, but by the end of the other 2 episodes, it doesn't go very well.
Not so well. So yeah, a really big part of the season gets introduced here in Special. And then another big hook into the next episode is that by the end of this one, Claire is back. She like wanders back into Locke and Boone's arms as they're going out on their daily, nightly trip to the hatch,
which they're basically just trying to like dig up at this point, and then eventually we'll find that in a few episodes try to break open.
They're keeping it on the down low at this point, but there's Claire, and it brings us into Homecoming. This is Homecoming, and it is a homecoming for Claire.
It looks a little sexually charged between Charlie and Ethan in this picture.
In the visual, it looks a little hot. It's the homecoming for Claire. It's a homecoming for Ethan. It's a homegoing for, is it Steve or Scott?
So Scott
Steve's
dies. Yeah, so basically what happens is it is Ethan versus everybody. With the return of Claire, now it's officially war between our heroes and the others as represented by Ethan. So
because like we don't want, like he did not want Claire, like Claire's Claire is back. We don't know what happened to Claire. We still don't know what happened to Claire by the end of season 1, but she should not be back here. Ethan wants her back.
Claire doesn't even know what happened to her. She has a little bit of amnesia.
Her memories of everything that have happened on the show so far on the island are non-existent.
But Ethan threatens basically like, you give Claire back to me or I will start killing your people. And that happens, unfortunately, at one point. Ethan is able to sneak into the beach under the cover of night and kill one of the people on Oceanic 815. And so it comes down to, after a few episodes that are largely focused on very specific characters, this is sort of like a return to that all for one mindset where, we are going to take a bit of a break from the Hatch in this episode, where it's going to be like Jack and Cade and Locke and Saeed and Sawyer all working together. But
this is why you need to know about the whatever the case may be, because they have guns now. And so they can take their guns, that's why I need 5 guns. So they have all of these guns and the one that they took from the marshal, and they're going to stake out like an op. They're going to use Claire as bait, and they're going to try and capture Ethan and take him for answers. But Charlie, you blew it.
He blew him away because he was so filled with rage that he ends up mucking up the whole plan by killing Ethan right there, right then. And probably the most non-essential flashback, maybe Josh in all of Lost, to be quite candid, which
it's
is
up
like,
there. Yeah,
which is Charlie tries to like con a rich girl to get some money to, surprise, surprise, buy heroin, but he ends up falling in love with her, tries to go clean. It goes about as well as him trying to sell that copier, and he throws up all over it. And then she realizes that he tricked him, and she's like, you're not a good person.
Yeah. So that doesn't really matter. It only matters insofar as like further underlining that I think Charlie often feels useless. Charlie often feels like just sort of like, instead of comic relief, he feels like a clown, and really
the punchline. Yeah,
he feels like a punchline. He's not like the Joker; he's the punchline, and he doesn't feel like he's in on it, and that can take him to some dark places, as we'll see. Here certainly, and there are going to be other instances where you see like Charlie is like. Hurley is almost always like a pretty fun time this season, right?
Good old fun time Hurley.
Even when things are kind of dark, but like Charlie can go pretty dark. And so if anything, the flashback sort of underscores that to get him in position to kill Ethan here. But gosh, what a punk move. Like, man, we could have really gotten some answers. So the question of like, who are the others and what do they want? We still have that on the board because Ethan is dead and we don't have any, we're no closer. We're no closer to solving this thing.
Yeah, but at least for now, the Ethan question is off the board. That yes, it has gone largely unanswered, but the overall threat that this man in particular posed to the group is done.
Right. He is dead. So Ethan is gone. And we leave Homecoming, where like Charlie still feels very protective of Claire, but she doesn't really know who he is at all. But she feels like, oh, you protected me and all that good stuff. So like maybe they're starting to get a touch closer together. We leave Homecoming and we go back to Sawyer, another Sawyer episode. And I think like, this is again like mid-season 1 of Lost is either like sort of like good vibes or like middling vibes. I think like we're still sort of in this era. Though I think that you and I have higher feelings on Outlaws than some other.
I was about to say I think people maybe account for an episode 2 from now as like, okay, this is when the season starts picking steam back up again and really barrels towards the end. But Outlaws is a really interesting character study for Sawyer, and while I think obviously his big twist in Confidence Man will allow us to find out how complicated he is, I do think Outlaws does a good job of like showcasing his heart a bit more, in that now we find out why Sawyer went to Australia, which was he was duped by
the T-1000.
The malevolent Robert Patrick to go there and kill somebody that was alleged to be the man that caused Sawyer's life to go to shambles.
Yeah. Sadly, you will never see Robert Patrick as the T-1000 on Lost again.
What's his name? Hibbs?
Hibbs, yes. Not to say that like shape-shifting Terminators aren't necessarily a part of Lost in some way, shape, or form, but this one is off the table here. And he sends Sawyer to Australia to kill the guy named Frank Duckett, who is supposedly the original Sawyer, but is not. He just is like a guy who owed Hibbs money, and Sawyer kills this guy. And that is like the first time Sawyer has done that, it seems like. And so this is like a huge thing for Sawyer that like sort of begins him on like this immediate self-loathing journey he's
almost
been
like
on
journey
the
of,
island.
a journey of penance, right? Of
Yes.
like, this is what I deserve.
Yeah.
But what makes this so huge is that, we've seen like bits and pieces of maybe little references of things that might bleed into other characters' stories. But this is the first explicit crossover episode, Josh, because Sawyer is going to, he initially goes to see Frank Duckett and he backs off the trigger. He decides to not do it there. And he goes to a bar to stew in his troubles. And who is sitting next to him but Christian Shepherd?
Right.
And
so it's a pretty big deal.
Especially when the episode ends. So the on-island stuff is a little less to write home about, where
there's a growth pig.
Like Sawyer's life is basically being ruined by this particular boar that he feels is purposely targeting him.
Yeah.
There's a nice scene where like him and Kate play I Never with the little liquor bottles from the play, and that actually sets up their characterization really nicely. But then it comes back to it, Sawyer is able to sort of like hunt down his Moby Dick, and him and Jack are commiserating, and Jack happens to echo a line that Christian Shepherd said to Sawyer verbatim in the bar. And this is where Sawyer starts to realize and put two and two together that the man he is sometimes warring with on this beach is the son of the man that he just talked to, who unintentionally led him to go kill Frank Duckett.
This is one of the moments in Lost that does date it, where like the triggering line is that's why the Red Sox will never win the World Series.
Right.
Is like something
which is wild considering that this came out in the fall of 2004 when the Red Sox won the World Series.
Yeah, and so this episode airs in the spring and is written after the Red Sox win. So you have to imagine that they're planting that in the drawer as like a wink and nod towards the audience of like life is continuing off island and we are aware of like historical moments that are happening, but they are insulated from it. But like I think probably actually in terms of like the timeline of the island, because they're there at this point for probably they've been there for close to a month, if not a little bit more by the time of Outlaws. And if they crashed on September 22nd, the Red Sox I don't know when they won the World Series that year. We could look it up, but like it's either like right then.
No, they won in October. The World Series takes place in October.
Right. So
it is day 29 and through 31 according to Lostpedia.
So either they won or they're just about to, like, or they just did, like, so like that's really great. But I think the bigger point that you're making is, okay, so what kind of crossover exists between these characters? Because that feels like a fairly major one, that like we're getting a big piece of the lore of what happened to Christian Shepherd in Sawyer's episode. That doesn't that doesn't fit sort of the mold of the show up to this point. And like that will not be the last time something like this happens. There are really, really major crossovers between these characters and the ways in which their lives intersect, and sometimes in like ways that you can predict, other times ways you really can't. But I think it's such a cool moment that will yield one of the best moments of the season for sure. As we get deeper into it. So we leave Outlaws and we go to an episode that we like to call Ooh in Translation.
Because it's just so weird to sound out the ellipses when you're in an audio medium. Because yeah, obviously this is another punny title, and we'll have a couple of these where they're taking off on Lost in Translation.
Right.
So lose the Lost and you just have in translation, which is also applicable considering that now we are starting to see the other half of Sun and Jin being accounted for here, to the point where we're actually going to get a little bit of a Rashomon, the other side of one particular scene that happens in flashback form.
Yes. So in this episode, we are going to find out that like Jin's not really a hit, man. Like this isn't like, at least like he didn't sign up for it. He did not.
He just gets doggies for it.
You know, he's getting like special gifts from Sun's dad, who's a real piece of shit.
Right. We find out that there's a little bit of like, a class warfare storyline going on with Jin and Sun, where Sun comes from this very rich family. Her father, Mr. Paik, owns this huge company, Paik Industries. And Jin, as we will find out in this episode, comes from a very poor background. He is the son of this fisherman who is unquestionably the best character in the show, but like he up this point is like, I believe, lied, right, that his father was dead, just
right,
because he wanted to obscure where he came from. And so when he is brought into this company, he basically is like, feels guilt ridden to say, if I want to provide the life for my wife that she deserves, I have to carry forward and do these terrible things, even though, again, from our perspective, like he comes home, yes, with blood on his hands, but he actually didn't kill a person. He just kind of beat them senseless. But even then, like after Sun yells at him, he looks up in the mirror and starts crying at the fact that he has almost succumbed to this point of extreme violence.
Yeah, but he is still like a very proud man, right? And so
Mhm.
like in the island portion of the episode, the raft that Michael has been building really is coming along, and then it gets destroyed, and it seems like Jin is the person who set the fire. And
Because
so
of their pre-existing rivalry.
right, right. But it turns out that he isn't the guy who did it, but no one knows this because he doesn't speak English, but his wife does. And so, in a moment of desperation, she lets it out in front of him that she speaks English, and she tells them that, like, he was trying to put the fire out. He wasn't trying to start it. And
Mhm.
this yields like a big moment from Locke being like, we're all pointing fingers at each other, but we're not the only people on this island, and we all know it.
We all know it.
And so it's like, why are we infighting when the threat is out there? And Jin is saved by his wife's ability to communicate with these people. They've been really outside the narrative of the show for the whole thing in a major way up until this
Mhm.
point, because Sun is too scared to talk to these people, and most of them don't know that she can speak English other than Kate and Michael, really. And now Jin and everybody knows, and Jin does not seem to love it at this point.
No, it's gonna lead to some strife between the two of them until they have the reconciliation right before the raft
Which
launches.
contextualizes it, right? Like by the end of season one, it's not that like Jin is mad at Sun, it's Jin is mad at himself that like he was so awful to her that she went and she did all of this. That
Yeah.
she went and she learned English. She was going to leave because he was so terrible. So like he deserves to be here is his feeling,
Yeah,
and
that's
the
what
only thing he can do is get her out of here.
that's the
Uh,
thing. He feels so terrible that because of he feels that they are in hell, maybe
right.
not literally, but more metaphorically because of the stuff that he did. And so he is going to now we really see the other side of the Michael Jin relationship, which is like
Yes.
Jin will be one of the first to help Michael rebuild the raft. And as a result, Jin will take up one of the coveted spots on the raft to try to get Sun specifically off the island.
Right. And so we do find out who burned the raft. It was Walt. He doesn't want to leave. He likes it here. And
Yeah.
Locke knows it.
And he also, I think, maybe has some odd feelings about like what happens if we're going to try to leave the island. Maybe forecasting his own doom there.
He seems to have, yeah, he seems to get these vibes, right? These bad vibes. Like later on, he's going to tell, don't open the hatch, Mr. Locke. Like he doesn't like what's down there. So we'll see if his premonition was correct in season two or not. But he, seems to have these instincts. And so he burned the raft. Why did he burn it? Maybe he felt like, if we get on that raft, I'm going to get abducted.
Yeah.
Can we not? Would be great. It would be great not to get abducted. So those are some of the big deals in translation. And finally, at last, we get to numbers. Which is an episode that is historic for Down the Hatch. The great Mark Douglas was able to assist Mike and I in tracking down the person who made the music that you hear at one point. It's a Hurley-centric episode. It's the Hurley-centric episode here in season one, where he is trying to, he sees these numbers on one of the Rousseau maps, and they're familiar to him, and he wants to find the French chick and figure out why she has these numbers. And at one point, he's walking on the beach, and you hear a song that goes, "You have it. You don't have it on the soundboard."
I don't have it on me specifically. Though maybe I do. Yeah, I don't think not in not in the version that we're currently using. I think that's unfortunately back in the day.
Sure, but we do have it sort of just like memorized. Everybody with me, drinks on me. Hey, y'all, who you came with, who you leaving with.
It's this random rap song that Hurley is listening to in the Hummer with his mother before one of the many misfortunes befalls him. And we riffed on it for 10 minutes straight. And it turns out ended up sort of etching ourselves within the history of Lost, in that we were able to help get a question answered, because for years people did not know who wrote that song and what it was about. And so thanks to Mark Douglas, we were able to track down the artist who wrote and recorded Who You With, Chris the Glove Taylor, and we had a lovely interview with him where he talked through making the song. We were able to extrapolate a lot of meaning from it. So it was a definite moment in, the entire path of DTH that I'll never forget.
A top contribution, in fact, potentially, Mike, our only contribution to.
Oh, I would imagine so. Yeah,
like
I don't know what else we put in there.
Okay, I do have the song. We can hear it
perfect.
real quick.
Everybody with me, drinks on me. Hey y'all, who you came with, who you leaving with? This my line, everybody with me. Hey y'all, who you came with, who you leaving with? Everybody with me, drinks on me. Hey y'all, who you came with, who you leaving with? This my line, everybody with me.
So we've always talked about who you came with, who you're leaving with. We came to this Lost miniseries, Mike, with a lot of people who had already seen Lost and listened to Down the Hatch. I hope that we are leaving the Lost miniseries with more friends, with more people who are on our line.
Yeah, our net worth has increased exponentially with Lost fans, much like one of Hugo Hurley Reyes, who again, up to this point was sort of like a Rosencrantz and Guildenstern all in one, right? Like this was a guy who had the golf story, but like pretty much was just a guy that would randomly show up, sort of a C tier character that had B tier moments. But when he was in the A tier, nobody would have expected this, that this is a man who went an exorbitant amount of money through the lottery, playing the numbers 4, 8, 15, 16, 23, 42. But that money turns out to be one of the worst things that has ever happened to him, as he finds out there is an incredible amount of bad luck that happens for every single good thing he tries to do with the money. And so the entire back half of the episode is not only Hurley trying to track down Rousseau and the source of the numbers on the island, but also him kind of trying to like reverse his own footsteps and find out where he got the numbers from and what they might mean.
And it seems like it comes from a man that Hurley met during a stint in a mental health institution.
Yeah, Leonard Toomey, I think his name was.
Sam Toomey.
Sam Toomey, yes.
Leonard got them from a guy named Sam Toomey. He goes and sources Sam Toomey to Sydney, Australia. He meets Sam Toomey's wife, finds out that Sam Toomey had heard the numbers while he was at war and like a dispatch from the sea. Yeah, and that he believed that he was cursed. He like had a lot of horrible things happen to him. His wife's leg was removed as a result of it. He died by suicide. He had a horrible time, and Hurley was thinking like, okay, because the numbers are cursed, and she's like, no, they don't. She does a really bad Australian accent. She's not Australian, and he gets kind of like shut down. And he finds finally somebody, because no one is believing him that his fortunes are cursed, that all of this is bad. He feels like they've crashed here because of his curse, probably, right?
Yeah.
And he feels like really unseen and unlistened to. Charlie is going to mock him when he tells him his net worth after like Charlie says, I was addicted to heroin.
Which really just shows sort of like not the chain of bullying, but the fact that like Charlie is a punchline, and then when Hurley decides to tell his truth about his net worth, Charlie's like, ha ha ha, very funny joke.
He doesn't think it's great. And then poor Hurley finally finds in Rousseau, he does track her down because he's spry. He finds in Rousseau somebody who has kinship with this question of like, I don't know what's up with the numbers. I just heard them and I wrote them down, and they could be cursed. And Hurley finally feels like somebody believes him. And so it's a big moment for Hurley. I think as far as like your experience watching the show for the first time, I hope that this is an episode where like you like Mike says, that like he's sort of like this B character who provides a lot of comic relief, but like Hurley is centrally located in this really big mythological question of the show, as we come to see like printed on the side of the hatch now that it's really been unearthed to a large degree. Are those numbers 4, 8, 15, 16, 23, 42? And why are they there? And what is up with them? This is a question that emanates from Hurley. So with numbers moving forward, I hope that you are taking Hurley seriously as a character, because if you aren't, you're doing yourself a disservice, because Hurley is at the center of some really great dramatic questions and moments on this show.
Not to mention, I mean, I think we certainly spoke about this in Down the Hatch, especially from a 2024 lens. I think Hurley is also a really interesting story in like mental health and self-worth at the same time. I know certainly when we talked about it in Down the Hatch, I sort of glommed onto his journey of being regarded largely as a source of comic relief, as someone not to be taken seriously. And while that is nice, that does sometimes come with a little bit of a downside and a feeling of isolation in that when Hurley does find Rousseau, who does confide in saying that, yeah, I was drawn in by the numbers, maybe they're cursed, he hugs her because this is the first time in a long time that he actually has someone who does not immediately discount what good Funtime Hurley has to say. And not to mention, like, from now on, your finger is going to be permanently pointed a la Leonardo DiCaprio because these numbers will recur not only in Hurley's storyline, but throughout the entirety of Lost. In fact, if you went back and rewatched season 1, if you wanted to, you would see the numbers were there even before this happened.
Yeah, they show up. They show up in different instances, and like they've shown up, broadly in pop culture. Maybe, I don't know if you haven't paid attention. Like maybe you'll see sometimes headlines of like someone who has played those numbers in the lottery before,
which feels like just tempting fate in so many ways.
Well, I'm a sick person, Mike, and like when I book airline tickets, I will often try to like book a seat that is one of the numbers. So like I'm shooting for 15 and 16 and 23 and 42. Like those are the numbers that like I want to sit on. And so it's like why would you do that when those numbers are associated with the show about a plane crash? And it's because I'm sick. And I feel like those numbers in my life are like lucky because they're associated with Lost. But for Hurley would look at me like I have 500 heads or probably closer to 108. Which is
what the numbers add up to, by the way.
Right. So Numbers is a great episode. It really sets up Hurley as a figure to watch on the show, and it renews the interest in the Hatch because the Hatch is not a big storyline right now. It's sort of taking a backseat to some of this other stuff, but it is the storyline in Deus Ex Machina, the second John Locke episode of the season, and the beginning of the end for Boone Carlyle, as we're going to get our first series regular death over the course of the next 2 episodes, and also the introduction of like, okay, so we're figuring out what are like the albatrosses on these characters, right? Like what is like the baggage that everybody is bringing with them, and
what's their canon moment?
Who did they come with, and who are they leaving with? Yes, this is their canon moment, and for Locke, that seems to be the fact that he grew up in the foster system, which we knew about already at this point. Didn't know his biological parents. In this episode, meets them both. Meets his mother, Emily, who swears that Locke was immaculately conceived. And so like imbues John with this possible like Messiah complex here. And then John is going to find out, no, I wasn't immaculately conceived. Here's my biological father. And this guy is a real piece of shit. Anthony Cooper, played by the great Kevin Tighe. Who is just a phenomenally awful, horrible scumbag who just wants John close to him so he can steal his kidney.
Right. And so it leads into this, again, I get another Locke episode closed out with an incredible sequence where, to also describe what's happening on the island, Locke is losing a little bit of faith. They're using trebuchets to break open the hatch. It's not working. And perhaps as a result of that, Locke is starting to lose feeling in his legs again. But he ends up making the find of the century, arguably, this Beechcraft, this little yellow plane located at the top of a cliff that, hey, maybe they could use it to either open the hatch or signal for help. And so because Locke's legs are not working, Boone volunteers to climb up in there. He gets in the Beechcraft, tries to radio for help, but in the process, the plane falls out of the canopy and Boone is gravely injured. And so it culminates in this haunting, beautiful, extravagant, magnificent moment for Locke, a seminal moment as he ends up waking up, finding out that his dad basically stole his kidney and took off, as Locke is driving in his like shitty little Volkswagen Beetle and angrily beating the car in both like frustration and despondency that his dad, he made this huge connection with him, one of the only people he's ever loved in his life, instantaneously, only to find out that it's all been taken out from under him. And on the island, he has a crisis of faith. He is banging on the hatch. It's a moment we mentioned before. I did everything you told me to. So why would you do this to me? He's talking about not being able to get the hatch open. He's talking about losing the feeling in his legs. He's talking about Boone's soon to be death. And the episode ends with this brilliant white light emitting from underneath the hatch. And that's all we see. And that's all. And that's all Locke needs to see to renew his faith for the rest of the season.
Yeah, that he basically is like asking for a sign, and there's no greater sign than this thing that you've been screaming, trying to open up, basically saying, well, I'm here, you know, so keep going, don't stop. And so it is this great like sort of expression of faith, and like what happens when you continue to have faith, and can faith be restored, but also like at what cost did you come to this moment? And it does seem in this episode, and is confirmed in the next, that it came at the expense of a young man's life. And like, is Boone sort of like the worst of the series regulars up to this point? Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
he's
like
fine.
He's a guy who's trying to like outshoot his class.
He's
right?
a tryhard, right? Like he
owns a business.
He owns a business. He wants to be the main character, right? Like he thinks he's the protagonist, and he is just like anyone. And everything that Boone can do, someone else can do better, is what it seems to be. And he's just like constantly looking for someone to like shine on him. And Locke shined on him for a while, but that shine, leads Boone to like walking alongside Locke for this fever dream that Locke has, a walkabout of sorts. It leads them to this plane, this beach craft that's up in the cliffs, that is just filled with heroin, which of course is going to be of great interest to Charlie by the end.
Especially when he finds it at the end of the season, yeah.
And that it seems like, but then there's a radio call that goes on, and the radio, we don't know who's on the other side of that call, but we do know what the person says. That Boone goes back in to listen to the radio, and Boone says, "We're the survivors of Oceanic 815." And the other voice on the other side says, "We're the survivors of Oceanic 815."
Yeah, and listen, eagle-eared viewers might notice that voice sounds a lot like Ian Somerhalder's, which people definitely noticed in the moment.
It was a big thing in the moment, for sure. It's like, is that also Boone? And so like, what's up with that? We'll have to wait and see. But this craft falls, and it has Boone inside of it. And Locke is going to be able to like retrieve him and deposit him back at the caves.
And then GTFO and have this big come to Jesus moment.
Right. Anthony Cooper being introduced in this episode is a big deal. Like, again, this is sort of the boogeyman for Locke. He is a con man that makes Sawyer look like a Disney prince, So this show loves a con man, Mike. It's not just Sawyer. Lots of confidence men in the mix. And so you and I get a good hate into Tony Coops.
How can you not? I mean, what this man pulls off, and especially again, it's watching these and especially with the stuff with Sawyer as well, that you can understand and not necessarily excuse the behaviors of some of these characters, but you can understand like why Locke has a chip on his shoulder.
Yes.
Right.
100%.
Like what drives him to become, and this is something that will be approached in later episodes as well, a very angry, hurt man.
Very angry. The response to the call of Deus Ex Machina is "Do No Harm," an episode that has everything to do with life and death choices. And this is ER in the woods, right?
Yeah.
We've got this a tale of two medical emergencies, Mike. A tale of two C-sections? No, that's not quite right.
No, my God, that's not how Aaron is delivered.
That's not how it goes. We have one man who is dying and one man who is being born. We have Boone and we have Aaron. And in the middle of all of that is Jack making these decisions, these quick decisions of like, Boone is dying. I have to be here. Kate, you're competent enough. You can deliver a baby. And it's like kind of crazy because you look at the condition that Boone is in and the resources that are available on the island at this moment. And this dude's going to die.
Right.
Like, this dude is clearly going to die. There's no question throughout this entire episode that like Boone's going to die.
Jack gets close to cutting off Boone's leg with a sharpened door from the airplane that crashed. That's how little supplies that they are running on. And so Jack tries, I've even heard this before, an entire episode trying to basically like sew up a wound, quite literally, that just continually stays open. And it gets to the point where, in some of his final words, Boone will tell Jack to let him go.
Let me go. Yeah, you can let me go. And so this question of like, can Jack Shephard let go of things again is being further stretched, like the skin that he stretched when he cut his back, saving the people.
Again, first question on that list. Not to mention, we find out about a piece of Jack's past, and again, why fixing has always been a part of him, which is that Jack was married. We meet Sarah Shephard, played by incredible future ABC star at this time, Julie Bowen, and they
could still be married. We don't know, right? Like,
we don't know.
Like, but this is like a bit like, wait, Jack, you're getting married? Like, but you seem to be like really into Kate. So what's up with that?
But we find out that Sarah was in a car accident and she was told she'd never walk again, but Jack fixed her. And I think it's this idea that like Jack is somebody who kind of has a cornerstone on the fact that he can solve a problem. He can throw enough of himself into something and the world will be a better place. And sometimes there are just situations where that doesn't happen. And that is the case with Boone, where his patient actually has to tell him, like, I am a lost cause at this point. You have to let me go. And it is, unfortunately, despite the fact that Jack has put people out of their misery before, we talked about this with the Marshal, it is still a huge moment for the character. And obviously, to your point, major moment for the show.
Major moment for the show. First series regular gone, will not be the last. So, you know, let this one sink in and buckle in. It could have been Charlie, right? Like it looked like it could have been Charlie a few episodes ago. And if you got to trade that in for Boone, all you Vampire Diaries fans, I'm sure, are thrilled.
Though Jack was about to give Boone his blood, which would have just made the transition so much easier for Ian Somerhalder.
Turn him into a vampire. The story goes that Ian Somerhalder had just bought a house in Hawaii and then was informed that he would be killed off of Lost. So that's tough. That's tough.
Yeah. I mean, you know what else is tough? That Saeed and Shannon finally like make things official. They go off on a little date, a romantic getaway in a tent down on the beach. And as Shannon comes back, she realizes that her brother
has been killed. And a really great piece of acting, I think, from Maggie Grace, that sort of like silent moment where Giacchino's life and death theme is playing as everyone is coming to see Aaron, the baby who is born, but she is in the caves with Boone, who is dead. And she's just like silently sobbing and screaming. Really, really rough. Aaron is born. This is a big deal.
Yeah,
this is a big deal.
And it's great because it's also like, despite the fact that we're 20 episodes in, there are still matchups of characters that we haven't really focused on yet. Like Kate and Claire had a little bit of stuff when Claire and Kate bond over astrology early on, but really this is one of the first moments where the two of them connect. Jen gets brought in on it. Obviously, Charlie is going to show up towards the tail end, and that's a big marker on the relationship between the two of them. And it really is a perfect episode because it is this amount of positivity and sweetness, especially considering everything that happened to Claire, that counters out so much distress and sadness from the death of Boone, no matter how you feel about the character.
Yeah, but we love. I think you and I both really love Jin's involvement in this specifically.
Yeah,
it's just he's just a great piece of the flavor of what's going on with Claire. So it's like, this show's tone is really expressed very well in Do No Harm, where it's like it can be really scary and sad and jubilant and all of these things at the same time. So Do No Harm, a really important episode for the show. And it brings us into the home stretch of season 1 with a pair of episodes that, are really sort of just like set pieces.
Right. It really is just sort of plotting things out before we get to our big 3-part finale.
The greater good, Locke comes back. Jack now hates this guy because he believes it was the great ending of Do No Harm. I'm going to go find, like, Boone didn't die. He was murdered, right?
Yeah.
Like, he's going to go and he blames John Locke. And so Locke shows up for the funeral. Jack tries to beat the crap out of him. Later, Shannon is going to try and kill Locke as well. Detective Saeed gets his Detective Saeed on as he interrogates Locke, finds out that he was the guy who smacked him on the head earlier in the show. He takes him to the Beechcraft. And like all of this is like, because there's like talk about the hatch. Boone was talking about the hatch before he died.
Yeah.
And Saeed, who we often talk about as like a human lie detector, doesn't buy any of what Locke is selling. and is like, okay, now you're going to take me to the hatch. No more games, John. And so like that's going to force Locke's hand in like actually opening up to Sayid what this hatch is. And then in the past, like you find out again, we've talked about this, that Sayid is given an opportunity to find Nadia by the government. He has to stop a terrorist plot. It's not our favorite storyline.
No, because because basically it's like, hey, here's one of your old friends. They're planning a terrorist attack. Go basically like snoop them out. And so again, I think the show on the surface does a really remarkable job, especially it's 2004. It's 3 years after 9/11. Islamophobia is still a pretty raging storm at this point in terms of Americans. And that's represented when Sawyer starts getting into it with Sayid in the pilot. And so it was awesome in the moment to find a person from Iraq who is personified as, again, not the ones that is stereotyped. And so it does feel a little bit like three steps forward, 2 steps back when it's like, oh yeah, and also one of your friends is a terrorist and you have to stop them.
Right. So not our favorite, kind of unsavory. Saeed's relationship with Shannon is on the rocks at this point.
Right, because she is obviously in a very bad mood after the death of her brother.
To say the least. So those are some of the big things from the greater good. Then we are at Born to Run is the name of this episode. The picture here shouldn't make me laugh.
I mean, it does look like she's laughing.
In the video version, we are looking at Kate with her boyfriend, Tom, or her childhood sweetheart, Tom, who gets killed helping her say stuff to her mother because she's dying on the run.
Yeah, because her mother is dying of cancer. And so she basically returns home and tries to visit her when her mom, who's played by one of the aunts from Sabrina the Teenage Witch, immediately rats her out to the police. And so Kate has reconnected with Tom. Obviously, the two of them were incredibly close until Kate left to the premises. And now Tom is married with a child, but they're still kind of like circling each other when she shows up back in his life. And it culminates in a sequence where like they're trying to get away. She insists he gets out of the car. He refuses. As a result, they drive through a police checkpoint and he gets gunned down.
And he gets shot, not shocked, shot. Yes.
And so now we know why this is quote unquote the man that Kate killed.
Right. She got him killed. So this is a big part of Kate's backstory, but the island story is sort of chess pieces. Again, raft is getting ready to launch. We're figuring out who gets to go on the raft. Kate wants to go on the raft because she's the fugitive and she doesn't want to get arrested. So she wants to, be a part of this so that she can just run when they get there. It seems like she is poisoning Michael to get his spot, but it's not quite that simple. It turns out that it was Sun working with Kate trying to poison Jin so that Jin would stay because she doesn't want him to go.
But also vindictively, Sawyer decides to reveal to everybody that Kate is the fugitive.
So now everyone knows. Yeah, like previously it was like Jack and Hurley knew, and now like everybody knows.
Yeah, and I think Sawyer knew maybe through like their time in Outlaws together.
Yeah,
but
he knows at this point, and he calls it out, and so her spot is blown up. And it's like there's been this growing closeness between Kate and Sawyer that now like takes sort of like this awkward hit, but actually in some ways seems like it heightens it.
Yeah, in a way, it's opposite attractions of a magnet still attract each other at the end of the day. And so, yeah, it's an odd ending for, again, a show that is known for its big climactic finishes. This is one of the more womp womp ones where, it's the big reveal of, oh, Sun was actually the one trying to poison Jin and Kate took the heat for it. And then they just sort of talk about like, hey, I thought when I would meet the love of my life that life would be simple. And Kate's like, yeah, me too. And then that's the thing that somehow brings us into our 3-part finale.
Right. The big thing going into the 3-part finale, which is Mike and I have talked about this as our favorite episode of the show. But like, is that hyperbolic? Yeah, a bit, because there's so many favorite episodes of the show. But we love Exodus quite a bit.
So good. I mean, it's such a great thing in that, yes, it does benefit from the fact that it's technically 3 hours long, but like, for a season that built out pretty much everyone in its main cast in some way, it really services nearly everyone incredibly well, where it feels like everyone has something to do, at least like one scene. Yeah, one scene or storyline. And also the flashbacks are incredible in that we spent this entire time talking about how people, for the most part, got to Australia. Now we actually focus on them getting onto flight 815.
Yeah, and it's great, right? Like, it's sort of like the flashbacks in Exodus are like, the last semblance of normalcy before they got to the island, right? Getting onto the plane. They're
There's
like
an entire final wordless sequence where we see that.
And like, it's filled with like, some of it is like dark. Some of it is like, some of it's like really, really dark. Some of it's like pretty whimsical. Like Hurley's whole sequence is really amazing across the 2-part finale. But it's interesting to say like these were their last moments of normalcy, like maybe, but it's a good reminder that like as much as they are literally lost here on the island, they were just as lost before they got here, right?
Yeah.
So many of them. So like that's the big thing that they're expressing there. But the big deal of the finale, and it's introduced in Born to Run by a character named Dr. Leslie Arst.
Yeah, it's
a
science teacher.
A science teacher played by Daniel Roebuck tells everybody we should have gotten this raft going a couple of weeks ago because of these winds. Like, we got to go. And so there's an urgency now to launching the raft. So the first portion of Exodus is really about like launching the raft and all of the things that go with it. And there's an additional layer that Danielle Rousseau shows up in camp. She like won't interact with people, but she shows up here saying that she heard the others say that they're coming. And if they are going to come, then you've got 3 options: run, hide, or die. And so they're like, okay, how about like launch raft as one of the options?
D, none of the above, but we're going to split the party here a little bit.
Always a good idea.
We're basically going to have 3 recurring storylines happening in this 3-part finale. We will have our rafties, which is Michael, Jen, Sawyer, and Walt. We are going to have a group take to the jungle to find Dynamite because they say, okay, great. You know where we could hide everybody from the others? How about this big old hatch that's in the middle of the ground? But we haven't gotten to it before. Daniel Rousseau happens to bring up, hey, there's this thing called the Black Rock in the middle of the jungle that has a butt ton of dynamite in there. Maybe you could use that to blow open.
And we'd heard about the Black Rock because of the maps before. So this is a cool season 1 payoff. Like a good example of like, like we'll set up a question, we will answer it.
Well, especially because, again, this is another fun little mini question to add in, because I thought, at least I took it for its word of like, okay, it's a big black rock. But no, it's the name of a ship that has somehow been washed into the middle of the jungle. And so we have a group of Jack, Kate, Hurley, Locke, and for a brief period of time, Arst. But then, just when you think, okay, Charlie's been kidnapped, he's good. Claire's been kidnapped, she's good. Aaron is kidnapped. And so it'll be the team of Charlie and Sayid who set out to find Aaron and recover him from Danielle Rousseau.
Yeah, so which it turns out is like Rousseau's plan, right? Like she just wanted to steal Aaron. There was nothing real, like there were no others coming. Like that's not actually a thing that's happening here.
Well, she overheard the others say they're coming for the kid.
Right, and so she thought that she could sacrifice the kid and get her kid. We haven't talked much about that, but her daughter Alex is also missing. And was taken years and years and years and years and years ago. So
yeah, back in like the late 80s, early 90s.
She's hoping to make a trade. And Charlie's like, yo, pathetic. Charlie like really goes in on her.
He's also going through his own trauma. He ends up getting his head cut open on one of Rousseau's traps, and Sayid has to use gunpowder to blow it closed.
Yeah, so that's crazy. Also, Charlie has made contact with the Beechcraft filled with Virgin Mary statues filled with heroin.
Right, because Locke showed Sayid it a couple episodes ago, and now Sayid walks Charlie through it. And yeah, suffice it to say, that's going to become something to dote on for next season. Where do we want to go next here, Josh? Because these are 2 very important storylines.
They are. I think before we close out the season, I think let's go with the raft. Okay. And so the raft is launched. The raft launch, I think specifically for Mike and I is like as top tier a sequence of TV, let alone Lost, as it gets. Like it's just so emotional.
Yeah, makes me cry every time. And it's not emotional in the way of like, oh my God, it's so sad. Like, no, it is full of happiness.
Go back, Vincent, go back.
These are people who, with the exception of the golf course, have been subject to so much misery for at least a month. And like, this was so much hope baked into it. The idea of like, oh my God, Michael's plan actually worked. These guys are sailing off, especially characters like Michael, Jen, and Sawyer, all of whom have had like some pretty bad moments on the island, are all showed in like absolutely exalting, in happiness. The dynamic they have together during their short-lived time on the raft is also a lot of fun. The conversation between Walt and Sawyer as like Walt starts to read Sawyer's letter is really interesting. And so, yeah, it does what every good TV show does, which is like build up our expectations only to send them crushing,
Plummeting.
much like the raft is crushed by a Molotov cocktail.
Yeah. So they take the boy, right? Mr. Friendly, I think, is what we call this guy.
Yeah.
Big Beardo is what we call this guy, played by MC Gainey. Shows up with his little fisherman's hat, and there seem to be like a couple people on there that like look like twins. Like everybody on this boat that pulls up to the raft, sketchy ass.
Yeah, they're dressed pretty podunk, but what happens is like they spy a ship on their makeshift radar and they have one flare to use. And so Michael prays, please God, and sets it off. And it's this really tense sequence where like the blip goes away and then it comes back as it's nearing. And we all think, oh my God, they found someone to rescue them. This is it. Their time on the island is over. And then this boat shows up and all seems okay. This big searchlight shining down on them until Tom implicitly says, the thing is, we're going to have to take the boy.
We're going to have to take the boy. And so they blow up the raft. It's like Sawyer gets shot.
Sawyer gets shot. Jin dives in after him.
Is Sawyer dead is a fair question to ask right now. Like, is Jin dead? Like we don't know what's going on with Jin. Walt is taken. Michael watches it happen as his son is screaming. And Michael is left screaming after Walt by the end of the season, and they're in the middle of the ocean.
Yep.
They're with nothing to cling on to. So a fair question to put on the list is like, did the raft guys just all die? I think it's a fair question. In addition to like, why did they take Walt? What did they want from Walt?
Yeah, obviously, again, it was teased that he might have been special. Or at least had some premonitions or certain connections, and could that be a reason why he's taken? And what's also interesting is this is our first glimpse of the others outside of Ethan, and it shows that maybe they were a much bigger threat. Maybe what we thought when we just stamped out one ant, that there was an entire colony that was soon to descend upon us.
Yes, so Colony is a different Josh Holloway show.
There we go.
Okay, so that's what's up with the raft. That's a terrifying note to leave things on.
It's wild, because I think it's also right before the last ad break as well. So we don't see them for the entire like 7 to 10 minutes that finish off the season. So
then the A plot of the episode is, okay, everyone needs to get we need to find shelter for the rest of the group because the others are seemingly coming. Jack has been read in on the hatch at this point. We need to open the hatch. We need to go inside and find out whatever's inside there, and we need to go down the hatch. That's what we need to do. And Russo tells them about the dynamite in the Black Rock. So they go. Dr. Arst comes along because he wants to like help with the explosives, but he ends up blowing up instead.
You ever hear about the guy who invented TNT?
Yeah, well, so did Arst, but that didn't save him from just getting exploded. And so Arst gets introduced in Born to Run, and you think, okay, maybe new characters like showing up from the background. Science teacher who was part of this the whole time, and we just haven't needed to see him. And he even complains about that, like, all you guys are like, so elitist. You never include any of the others. And then he shows up, and he just, he is like Captain Red Shirt, right? Like he is like sort of like the king of these people. And his name, Dr. Arst, is taken from Damon Lindelof's high school science teacher who apparently sucked. And so Lindelof's vengeance against that guy is that he named a character after him and blew him up on TV.
Yeah,
the explosion of Arst is truly one of the most iconic deaths of Lost.
And it is also one of the most darkly hilarious moments in the show's history where, again, Arst is complaining for the umpteenth time and then just blows up. And we get the infamous line later on from Hurley of, you've got some Arst on you.
You got some Arst on you. So they do get the dynamite, even though Locke, who has basically just like, potentially like in Jack's opinion, killed a guy. Locke's social skills leave a lot to be desired as he's like talking about the dynamite operation while a dude just exploded. Yeah. They switch backpacks with the explosives.
Right, because that was more of a Jack Kate thing, right? We're like, okay, we're gonna put the dynamite in one backpack, but then when they're chased by the monster at a certain point, like Kate nearly falls down a hole, and Jack's like, oh, Joe, go to this backpack. It has the dynamite in it. And it turns out that maybe Jack doesn't trust Kate all the way.
Or he just always needs to carry the ball. Like he's got to be the one who carries the football. He loves a football. And so then there's two questions that kind of emerge. They encounter the monster in the jungle. And Locke, who had previously had an encounter with the monster, and it had been like a positive encounter with the monster. He looked into the eye of this island, and what he saw was beautiful. It was, like you saw like sort of like the white glow on him. And now he's looking back at it fearlessly, but it takes him. It wraps itself around him and drags him through the jungle and is about to bring him down into this hole. And what was going to happen if Jack didn't pull Locke out is an open question. Like, what did the monster want with Locke is an open question. And then a second question is the monster made of smoke?
Yeah, so people were able to, even back during that day, like freeze frame, screenshot the few moments we would see of the monster going through the jungle, and all they saw were wisps of black smoke. And so it brings about a lot of theories. Is it nanobots, perhaps, more in a swarm variety? Could it instead be something a bit more corporeal? Because it does grab Locke and drag him through. So while there is one monster to deal with, there might be another as Jack is going to tease to Kate. We might have a Locke.
We might have a
problem.
Locke problem, is what he says to Kate. Like, if we survive this night, we're going to have a Locke problem. So he needs Kate to be in lockstep so that they're both on the same page about what to do about John. And like, even like it's, Hurley sees the numbers on the hatch, right?
Yes, and nearly gets himself arsed in the process. He tries to stop the dynamite from exploding.
But like Locke hears what Hurley is saying, and he just blows it up anyway because he needs to know what's down there. Like, nobody wants to know what's down the hatch more than John Locke, except every single person in actual Earth watching Lost in the real time. And we don't get the answer. And so season 1 of Lost ends with, yes, a really iconic shot in the pantheon of Lost of like going down the hatch, looking up at Jack and Locke looking down, but not knowing what they are looking at. And in the real time, this episode airs in May of 2005, and we have to wait for season 2 to pick up in September 2005. And
less than 3 months.
To say that was a really, really long 3 months is underselling it. The good news for you who just finished watching Lost season 1 is you can press next episode, and you only have to wait 1 week for Mike and I to talk about what's down the hatch, because you will find out. You will find out really quickly in the going of season 2. It won't take you too long before you know what's down there. What the ramifications of what's down there are will be a totally different story. That will be something that plays out. So have fun with that. That's going to be a really fun time. And season 2 is going to be really, really fun for us to chop up and talk about. But that's Lost season 1 in a nutshell for first-time viewers, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, it was really fun to engage with. It's probably my favorite season of the show, and that is not to impugn the other seasons that follow. There's a lot of great content behind it, but like, you never forget your first. I talked on our opening episode about how much season 1 in particular made me fall in love with scripted drama in a way that I had not before, and it really was through even some of the odder stuff, especially in hindsight, that happened in season 1. Just the general quality, bringing about these epic, beautiful TV sequences, character twists that the show and the series and TV in general had not seen before. It was so magnificent, and I loved getting to engage with this back with you again. But yeah, next season, we're going to follow up with what's in the hatch. We're going to follow up with what the case is with where we left things on the raft, on the beach. Listen, this is a TV show, so I am not spoiling things by saying there will be new characters.
Sure, we met a very a very famous person shows up in the season 1 finale. That's Michelle Rodriguez buying Jack a drink at the bar.
That's old Letty herself.
Like, what's up with Michelle Rodriguez? I think we could put down as one of the big questions here. Like, why is Michelle Rodriguez on Lost?
Yeah.
You'll find out in season 2.
You will. We promise you that, and plenty more twists and turns and character beats to come. Josh, this has always been such a fun experiment, and I cannot wait to come back next week and do it all again. And this is also, from an episode count perspective, the longest season of Lost as well.
Yeah. Mike, it turns out that we can still talk about new things on Lost. How about that? Good surprise. Nice to find out. Yes, really fun. We, of course, want to hear from all of you. We would love to get your feedback down the hatch, rhap@gmail.com. downthehatch@gmail.com. We will not be able to read your feedback and answer it for the season 2 recording because we'll have to record in advance, but we will have these questions that are coming from you, your feedback, by the time we get to season 3 and onward, so it can inform a lot of the things that we know you're interested in keeping an eye out for. But again, just to reiterate some of the big questions that are on the board as like some thought experiments, if you want to try and answer some of these questions, we would love to get your answers or your theories. So let's put some of them out there. I've written them down as we've gone.
Whoa, nice.
Guys, where are we? What's up with the monster? Why can John Locke suddenly walk on the island? Is there ghost stuff happening? Who are Adam and Eve, and what's up with Adam and Eve? What are these whispers all about? Why can't Aaron be raised by another? Who are the others? What's down the hatch? It's a podcast, but beyond that, what's so special about Walt? What's so special about these numbers? How did this Beechcraft get here is one that I wrote down.
Yeah.
The plane that crushed Boone. Who was on the radio in the Beechcraft? How did this ship, the Black Rock, wind up in the middle of the jungle, and what's the deal with that? Why is the monster seemingly made of smoke? So, kind of more, what is the monster? Why did the others take Walt, and are the Rafties dead? Why is Michelle Rodriguez on Lost?
The most important question of all.
And then again, in all caps, what's down the hatch?
Okay, so 17, technically 18 questions considering the repeat.
So these questions are on the board. We could have gone for 16, but we had a couple that we had to get back to.
Yeah.
These questions are on the board. I think these are some of the bigger questions to ask right now. If you've got theories, if you've got answers, if you're somebody who has watched Lost before and you feel like there are other questions that people should be asking, specifically like through season 3 is when we'll really be able to address that. Write in down the hatch, RHAP @gmail.com. Make sure you are subscribed. Down the hatch, wherever you get your podcasts. We are everywhere you can find us. So subscribe to the feed, but subscribe to the main We Know Scripted TV RHAP podcast feed when you go to robhasawebsite.com/scripted. You'll find all the information there. Your ratings and reviews greatly appreciated, specifically on the We Know Scripted TV podcast feed, where you get all sorts of shows, including TV for Real with Mike Bloom and Sasha Joseph, where they talk to reality stars every week about their favorites in the scripted TV space. So once again, that's robhasawebsite.com/scripted. You can watch video versions of these podcasts as well on the We Know Scripted TV YouTube page. Mike Bloom, next week, season 2 for first timers. That's the homework. People need to go and watch all of season 2 for the next week. You got to finish it. Or you can always just like listen back to these whenever you go. Yeah. And then like if you go nuts and you watch all of Lost and because you just couldn't wait, then you get to go all the way back to the beginning of the Down the Hatch feed.
Yeah,
and
you can be like, God. You can be maybe those skeletons if they were Kate and Jack and go all the way around. But yeah, season 2, you shave one episode off. It's only 24 hours instead of 25, but still lots of great stuff to enjoy in there. And I can't wait to come back and talk with you all again next week, Josh.
Gonna be really fun. So check it all out on Down the Hatch. We'll be back in 1 week to go down the hatch with season 2 of Lost for the very first time. Until then, everybody, take care. Bye-bye.